Tonight's study session of the Boulder City Council. I'm Councilmember Rob Kaplan, and thank you for joining us. We have two items on tonight's agenda. First, we'll have our financial forecast, and our second item concerns ballot measures. Before we go into our work items, I'd like to outline how the meeting is going to be conducted. First, staff will give their presentation. Then we'll have time for clarifying questions. If you have questions, please wait for staff to complete the presentation. Then we'll conclude our council discussion responding to staff's questions. Let's start with our first item tonight, the financial forecast. We'll now turn to our city manager, Nuria Rivera Vandermeide, to introduce this item.
Thank you so much, Council Member. Council, tonight we have two separate items, but they are related. Our first item today is our financial forecast, and we just want to welcome our friends from CU who are always great partners in this work. The realities and assumptions in our forecast tonight help shape our upcoming budget as departments are right in the midst of thinking about their own department proposals. This will also help us ground tonight's second item for discussion. So without more here, I'll turn this over to Krista Morrison, our CFO.
Well, good evening, Mayor Brockett and members of City Council. Krista Morrison, Chief Financial Officer. As Nuria mentioned tonight, we are joined by our partners from CU's Business Research Division, Dr. Richard Wobekind, Brian Ludendowski, and Robert McNowan. They will be providing an overview of economic conditions, informing Boulder sales and use forecast. This will be followed by a presentation from Principal Budget Analyst Scott Carpenter on the city's financial forecast and 2025 year-end results for sales and use tax and property taxes, along with an update on key assumptions and considerations for the development of the 2027 budget. Sales and use tax and property tax continue a trend of flattening due to a variety of reasons you'll hear more about in tonight's presentation. We're lowering projections in those major revenue sources for the current fiscal year, and future forecasts are being adjusted. This is impactful as these two sources of city revenue are the two largest sources of revenue outside of utilities revenue. Staff is closely monitoring expenditure growth with the flattening revenue. The city has taken measures in recent years to manage expenditure growth through strategic realignments and reductions while focusing on continuing to deliver quality services expected by the Boulder community. Sales and use tax and property forecasts do assume some recovery in future years. Not the historic growth rates experienced by Boulder over the past decade, but modest growth rates nonetheless. There are many unknowns, such as federal policy, which can have a significant impact, especially on future year forecasting. We'll continue to monitor major economic drivers and conditions with our partners at CU and provide updates to the City Council. With that, I'll turn this over to Brian at CU to kick off tonight's financial forecast presentation.
All right, thank you very much. Council, staff, I really appreciate the opportunity to be here again. And I'm going to go through the presentation, and then Rich and Robert are here to help answer some of your questions. So I'm going to jump right in because we have a lot of content to get through. And I'll start with the risks and the uncertainty. So you just heard a few of the risks mentioned, but these are many of the risks and many of the points of uncertainty that we're thinking about when we are formulating our forecast. So on the vertical axis, we look at the likelihood of a risk happening, and on the horizontal axis, the severity of that risk. And you can see that energy prices have cropped up as a highly likely and high severity risk. This is something that wasn't on our radar even 3 months ago, but now it poses a pretty great risk to the health of the overall economy. But as we look around here, there's other downside risks. It's the federal government restructuring, which we know Boulder is sort of uniquely exposed to. There's geopolitical conflicts, there's tariffs, there's foreign policy, there's immigration policy. On the upside, we take a look at Sundance as a unique upside risk for Boulder, and tax cuts. HR1 actually provides some tax relief, which can be a form of stimulus for consumers. So we keep all of this in mind as we're going through our forecast. So I'm going to leave you with just a few salient points. Number one is that economic growth has been modest. So when we take a look back in the fourth quarter of 2025, the Bureau of Economic Analysis does three estimates for overall gross domestic product, or the value of all the goods and services produced within our economy. They adjust this for inflation. And when they produced the third and final estimate of GDP, it was lowered to 0.5% in the fourth quarter. It improved a little bit in the first quarter of 2026 to 2%. And the forecast for the second quarter are even a little bit better when looking at the GDP now and nowcast from the New York Fed. But still, when we take a look at medium-term growth or long-term growth, we're trending below that long-term average. And I also put up here a couple of alternative scenarios. So there are economic situations in which we could enter a recession and actually see decreased GDP. But on the other side, we also see potential for upside growth. And we take that into account when we're doing your forecasts. We model Boulder's revenue under alternative economic scenarios. So point number two here is that employment growth has stalled. You've probably heard this in the news quite a bit, but when we take a look at national employment growth, one thing I'll point out here is we're starting with a left axis at 130 million jobs, and you can see the impact of the pandemic recession and the climb back from that event. And we reached that pre-recession peak in 2022, and there's this inflection point where we started adding jobs, but at a slower rate. And now it's really flattened out nationally to where we just grew at 0.2% year over year in March. And in fact, when we take a look at the revised data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, this is the national employment data. In 2025, we added just 10,000 jobs per month on average for the year. And last year, there were 5 months where we had employment loss. Now, if we look at where that growth and where the losses were coming from, there was a disproportionate amount of growth coming from healthcare. So when we removed the healthcare sector, there were actually 10 months of employment decline nationally in 2025. 2026 has shown a little bit of a rebound. For the first 3 months, we had an average job growth of 68,000 jobs per month. But you can see the volatility that we have here. It was a strong up month, a strong down month, and then followed by a strong up month. We actually have the April data now. And it was moderately up as well. So perhaps we've seen a little bit of a turn within the job market. The slow job growth, though, is also true within Colorado. In 2024, we added just 1,400 jobs per month. In 2025, we lost just over 1,000 jobs per month. And here in 2026, we're averaging a loss of 2,000 jobs per month. So just in contrast to the nation, where the nation has seen some modest growth in 2026, we're seeing modest decline in 2026. So Colorado is suffering a little bit more of that job loss. And I like to put this in perspective over time. So on the left axis, the left chart here, we're looking at job growth by year in Colorado, starting in the year 2000. And I'll point out there are many periods where we had employment loss in Colorado, but all of these revolve around recessionary events. So in 2000, we had the dot-com bust, and this disproportionately impacted Colorado, where we recovered more slowly than the nation. Then we have the financial crisis in 2008, 2009, and then COVID. But what's unique about 2025 is we recorded some job loss without the nation being exposed to a recessionary event. So point number 3 here is that the energy spike poses risk to inflation and consumption. And clearly on the left, in the left chart here, we see the sharp rise in inflation in 2022, and then the fall of inflation. And it really was oscillating around that 3% mark for a couple of years. But what we've seen now is that there's been a rapid increase in inflation in a very short amount of time. And we point to this really being largely attributable to the war in Iran and the energy price spike. We have data for the nation for April, and for the Denver metro region, we get it every other month. So we have this for March. But now for the nation, we've seen inflation really creep up to 3.8%. The March data for the Denver metro region, the only region that's reported for Colorado, was at 4.2. And we look at this housing component, which is almost half of the basket of goods and services that we spend our money on. And this housing piece is growing much higher than the nation overall. This is a little bit confounding to me because we have slow home price appreciation right now, and we also have flat or falling rents within the Denver region. So I personally don't quite understand why this is so high, but this is how the measured data is coming in. So we're seeing elevated prices. So keep that in mind as we're talking about your revenue growth, and if you're having real growth in your sales and use taxes. So related to inflation, of course, is energy. These are the average gasoline prices for the state and for the nation. And I would point out a couple of things here. One, when we take a look at the current level of gasoline prices and trace that back through time, it's not the highest level of gasoline prices we've ever had. They were actually higher in 2022. But this is, in fact, the fastest increase that we've ever had in gasoline prices. And so when we compare gasoline prices the week of May 4th back to late January, we're measuring a 93% increase in gasoline prices in Colorado and a 50% increase nationally. We're still a little bit below the nation, but through time, we tend to be a little bit below the nation more than we are above the nation. So that's a shock, not only to our pocketbooks as we are spending money on fuel. We start to have to shift our discretionary spending from other items that we may be purchasing to energy. And that can also be impacting sales and use taxes, which we'll talk about in just a moment. But I think it also has a psychological effect where people feel like they may need to hold back more or change their spending patterns. So what is the Fed to do, right? So the Federal Reserve has this dual mandate of full employment and stable inflation around 2%. And so I demonstrated that employment growth has been pretty modest. It's modest nationally, it's decreasing in Colorado. And at the same time, we have elevated inflation. And so the Fed is sort of in a quandary about interest rates. If they raise interest rates too fast, then they could really slow down the economy further, and this could be damaging to employment growth. If they lower interest rates, it could fuel more economic activity and have upward pressures on inflation. And so they've decided to just keep rates steady during the last few meetings. So now turning to the retail environment, we take a look at national retail sales in black and Colorado taxable sales in this sort of beige brown color. And I put this up here because Colorado's taxable sales are not decoupled from what happens nationally. You can see that these two series travel together through time. They don't travel completely in tandem, but this is an important indicator for us when doing your retail sales forecast. And despite consumers saying in consumer confidence surveys that they're worried about employment, they're worried about the labor market, they're worried about inflation, they are not sort of matching their behavior to those worries. They continue to spend, and when we take a look at national retail sales data, growing at 4% seasonally adjusted, they are spending beyond inflation. So this is real growth, modest, but real growth in retail activity. In Colorado, we have growth, but when we adjust this for inflation, this would actually be negative growth in net taxable sales. Okay. When looking at the national data, I think it's also important to take a look at what people are spending money on and how they're shifting some of their spending. So when I took a look at this last month, the top item here was sporting goods. and then we had clothing, and we had restaurants. All of those were above the total average for retail sales. This month, when the report came out, that shifted. And so now gasoline stations recorded the greatest growth. That price effect, it's not quantity, it's price driven. Sporting goods fell. Restaurants also didn't fall. They're just growing at a much slower rate. And so I think we're starting to see how the price effect of energy and gasoline is shifting what people are purchasing. And so I demonstrated that Colorado taxable sales travel with national retail sales. And so I also plotted here Boulder taxable sales and Boulder sales taxes. And you can see that all of these really travel together. There's more volatility as we get more local, but this is important for the forecasting exercise. And I think it's also interesting to compare Boulder's taxable sales to other large taxing jurisdictions around Colorado. So this is from the Colorado Department of Revenue. This is looking at the state's share of taxable sales from all of these communities. So this is what the state is collecting. And so it's a real apples to apples comparison as we look around the state. And so in 2025, the state average was 1.9%, which again was modest and again was below the rate of inflation. But there's quite a bit of variance as we look across the 30 largest taxing jurisdictions, right? Westminster and Brighton were outperforming. Commerce City and the city of Boulder were underperforming when looking at this apples to apples comparison. And when we take a look at this for, this should say year to date in 2026 for the first 2 months, this is just January and February. We see that the state grew a little bit faster for the first 2 months of the year, and Boulder pretty much matched that state average for the first 2 months of 2026 year over year. So just closing the economic overview piece, we take a look at the competitive landscape and think about Boulder's strengths, weaknesses, sort of internally, and then opportunities and threats that are really external to the city. And we're sort of mindful of the unique risks that Boulder is facing right now, from federal policy and state policy to the tech concentration that we have here that has been a source or a driver of Boulder's growth for so long, but it's a little bit under pressure in the current time. So very quickly, I'm going to go into the Boulder forecast. Just a reminder that we look at the national economy when generating our forecast, and we have national economic forecasts from Moody's Analytics. We use Moody's in part because it's the same forecast that the Office of State Planning and Budgeting and Colorado Legislative Council uses, and the State Demography Office. So we're all on this same subscription for Moody's forecasts at the national level. And then what we've created is our own Colorado economy model and our own Boulder economy model. And we're relating how all of these economies and how your tax revenues are moving with these economic indicators so that we can generate a good, confident forecast for Boulder. And what we're looking at here on the right-hand side is your forecast. And so the black line is what we consider the most likely path for Boulder. But when we produce this for city staff, we run your forecast through a more pessimistic economic outlook, through a more optimistic economic outlook, and then we also present the upper and lower statistical bounds so that you know really that margin of error where we believe that it's highly likely that your revenues are going to fall within these bounds as we march through time. And when we're doing the forecast, we don't just take your total sales taxes and total use taxes and project that out. We actually forecast it by component. So we get taxable or sales taxes from grocery stores and from restaurants and computer sales and auto sales and building materials and so on. And we've created equations to forecast out each of these items, and then we sum those up to your total. And we believe that that produces a better forecast because depending on the economy, sometimes we see divergence in how these individual components perform. And so this is, again, your forecast. And so you can see your history here where we saw a dip down in 2020, a rebound, and then it stalled a little bit in 2024, but we have slow but steady growth throughout the horizon. And it shows up here as well in the table. So we go from 175 million down to 173, and then it starts to march upwards. Not a very fast pace, but upwards nonetheless. And so I think it's helpful to take a look at this in percentage terms as well. So sales taxes and use taxes, we see much more volatility in use taxes through time. But keep in mind when you're looking at these numbers, the rate of inflation that is behind them, right? So even though you had growth of 1.6% sales and use taxes in 2025, and we're projecting 1.6 in 2026, when we adjust those for inflation, that is a real decrease as far as purchasing power goes from that sales and use taxes collected. And with that, I just want to thank city staff for all of their help as we go through this forecasting process. They're an incredible resource. They help us understand the numbers that they're providing us so that we can turn around and produce what we believe is a pretty good forecast for you. So we have really appreciated this partnership through time. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you for that. Now I will ask, does council have any clarifying questions? I don't see any hands raised. Okay. Comments?
I got a question, Rob.
Sure.
Well, thanks for that presentation. And yeah, I mean, it's kind of sobering what's going on for sure, and unpredictable to say the least. My question kind of centers on how, since some of this might be maybe perhaps a little transient, right? I mean, I think a lot, obviously you pointed out the oil stuff as being a big driver. If things were to sort of correct themselves, how long do you see that lag lasting? You know, if the conflict ends and things kind of open up, are we talking like 2 months, or are we talking 6 months to 2 years before that the impact of all of that finally works its way through the system, and either prices and the cost of just use of oil and gas comes down? I'm just like, what's the lag on the responsiveness to things in that regard, especially with regards to how what's going on with oil? I'm curious about that.
I don't know if my colleagues want to jump in. I mean, the typical story is like 6 months in both directions. You get the immediate, you should get a fairly immediate effect on gas, pump prices coming down. But there's other uses of petroleum, and they've been built into the system at this point. And so, how does that go in reverse, if you will, as it comes back down? But tying this to what Brian was saying about the Fed policy, I think if they saw that happen, at least they would be more comfortable that the inflation rate was trending in the right direction. Right now, with the way it is, they have no confidence that inflation is trending in the right direction. As a matter of fact, they think it's trending in the wrong direction. It's on its way up. So it's putting them in a very much wait and see, but I'd say a conservative stance in terms of, rate cuts or any sort of stimulus.
And just a follow up, is this kind of the prototypical stagflation conundrum that we face right now?
It is, but just a slight bit of context. Everybody, people laugh when I say this, but everybody says, "Well, you've been around so long, you've heard all of this stuff already, and you've gone through all of this stuff already." And And I have seen oil spikes before, and I have seen these other types of things. But the overlay of the demographic change in the country and in the state is significantly different than it's been in the past. We have the aging population with the aging healthcare costs and retirement costs and so on, but we also have a significantly lower immigration and so overall rate. Right now, the U.S. last thing I saw was below replacement rate in terms of population. So we've kind of moved into the Japan and other place, Greece and Italy kind of mode of shrinking base. So so it's this is a long answer to a short question. The stagflation, I would say, is people would argue absolutely, but some of that slower level of employment growth also is being impacted by the demographics. Brian mentioned sort of briefly, but both nationally and in Colorado, labor force is in decline right now, total labor force. So when you have that as a backdrop, you're not going to get as many jobs, and you're still going to be able to keep a relatively low unemployment rate, and that's what we're seeing.
Okay, I apologize if I'm out of order. A lot of hands went up quickly. Just want to remind you, we do have a second part of this presentation. Tara, you're still muted.
Yeah, I think I wasn't next. I think Nicole was next. Do you?
Okay.
So I don't really care though, Tara, if you want to.
Okay, I don't either.
Rob,
I'll just do mine.
Rob.
It's just one question. I'll just do it.
One quick thing. Rob, if you open the participants tab, it'll show people in the order that their hands were raised.
Oh, it's in order. Nicole.
Awesome. Thank you. And Rob, can you help me how my ADHD brain with data goes in so many, I have so many questions. So can you help me focus how many? Like
yeah, let's start out, everybody, if we can just do one question, because there's a second part to this, and then we're going to get into the meat of the ballot measures.
Okay, thank you. First of all, thank you so much. This is always one of my favorite presentations of the year. So just really appreciate you all taking time and coming to help. So our main job tonight, I think, as council is to pick a scenario, one of these scenarios to help out with the budgeting process. And one of the things I've been worried about is recession. A couple of your graphs made me a little more concerned, I think, than I came into the meeting with, in that the job growth, Colorado job growth, and the gas prices, both of those seem to track, like big increases or decreases seem to track recession periods, right? And I guess I'm looking at the both of those markers for 2025 and the initial start of 2026. Like, is that something we should be thinking about? Because it kind of looks like it matches the prior periods where those things were going up or down.
And I can't see my colleagues' faces, so I don't know if they're jumping on this or not. I would just make the following. You're seeing GDP growth. We're still seeing employment growth. The kinds of things that mark a recession are not there yet, and that's why it's not built in, and I don't think it should be built in. Now, the caveat, you talked about the gas price. My caveat on this is you can go back and look at history. If oil prices remain elevated for a period of time, 6 months or more, we've almost always gone into a recession with elevated oil prices. We're probably a little less sensitive to oil price surges than we were in the past. The country is less oil dependent, not just automobile wise, but even industry uses less oil than it has in some of the major times in the past. But all of that said, I wouldn't bet against a recession if we don't resolve this energy price spike that's there now.
Thank you.
Okay. Me, Rob?
You were muted, Rob. I'm sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry, Tara. Yes, you're up. Sorry.
Okay. I only have one question, and I'm going to comment that I'm kind of in a downer mood right now from this presentation. I'm agreeing with Nicole on that. Why do you think we have job loss compared to the rest of the country? I was thinking that was reference to one of the slides.
Brian, are you going to comment, or Robert?
Well, I think that there's a couple of reasons. One, still, when we take a look at Colorado over the long term, coming out of the Great Recession, over a 15-year period, we outperformed the nation in almost every way. We were a top 5 economy in Colorado, and the envy of most other states. And so we're, I guess, contrasting short-term growth to the long-term growth is sort of interesting, because short-term, yeah, we're losing jobs in the very short term. So are 27 other states or so. But over the long term, including the current period, we're still among the leaders. And so I think part of it is other states hit their stride late, and they're playing catch up, and they're growing faster. So that's part of it. But on the other hand, we truly are growing slowly or not at all. And I think part of that speaks to our industry composition, where some of our tech jobs have been hit. But it's not just tech. When we take a look at the industries that are losing jobs right now, it's pretty widespread. And Rich talked about the demographics. We have slow population growth. When we take a look at net migration to the state, it's one of the smallest periods in recent history. We have a decreasing labor force, and part of that is retirees. We have 30,000 people or 40,000 people retiring per year and staying in Colorado. So our labor force is shrinking a little bit. And we're also seeing demand for workers slip. So taking a look at job openings, they're not as high as they were a year ago or 2 years ago. So I don't think it's necessarily any one thing, but we're, all of these things together, we're seeing some job loss.
I just add one thing to Brian's list there, that it's quite apparent that Colorado is being picked on by the Trump administration in terms of some important adverse impacts on the state budget, and that filters down to Boulder in particular, but other municipalities too. So I know we're concerned about the federal labs, the loss of jobs there. I'm not sure how much of that has shown up in the data yet, but so there's a variety of ways in which Colorado is being adversely impacted by what's going on in Washington.
Ryan?
Thank you, Professor Lewandowski and team. So you've give kind of a big context about risks, opportunities, threats, and so on. Sort of covering a lot of landscape. And then you've zoomed in and given us some aspects of revenue, and we looked at sales. You've looked at sales tax revenue projections. I'm curious about the sales tax versus property tax sort of matter. I don't think unless I missed it, you didn't really touch on property tax, and perhaps that's because it's just assumed to be relatively stable. But could you just comment on, would you put have you looked at the idea of Boulder's ratio of sales tax to property tax as something that represents like a disproportionate issue for our city versus others?
I haven't looked at that ratio. I think that'd be interesting to take a look at. And I think the finance presentation will show you a lot more about the property taxes. We do work on that as well, but the formula has gotten a lot more difficult in Colorado. So it's been difficult to sort of forecast it out with some of the price reductions on actual values and changes in the assessment ratios. So I'll defer to city staff on that one.
Thanks.
I'm going to call on myself real quick. We have a new SEC chairman, Paul Atkins. We don't know what his actions are going to look like, whether he's going to basically be a puppet to Trump or not. A lot of people saying he's not. But my question is, for the city of Boulder, like in Colorado in general, if we do move into a recession, how does that compare over, say, the next 18, 24 months? How does that compare to the SEC actually lowering interest rates and going into quantitative easing, which is going to boost up inflation?
Do you mean the Fed?
The
Rob?
Fed,
Sorry,
the
so
Fed.
that's Walsh, not
Oh, I'm sorry. I meant Walsh. Yep.
Yeah. Well, I usually go off on my sort of story about this. So I'm assuming he's not going to be a puppet, so maybe that's a bad assumption. I'll just start with that. But a loss of independence by the Federal Reserve would be absolutely critical to financial markets and globally. And the U.S. is floating a lot of debt right now, and only more by the month. So I would argue it's likely, even though it's going to be, quote, quantitative easing, the ultimate impact is it's going to be driving up long-term interest rates in the economy if we start to sort of see that expansion, not in the short term, but in the longer term, combined with the debt. So I don't think it would create the recessionary example. I think it could create, in the short run, I think it could create the super stagflation sort of one. We don't get that much job growth and we get much higher inflation. So that would be, my best scenario on that one. I don't know if
Thank you.
Robert wants to jump in on his thoughts on that.
Yeah, I would add that in our discussion so far, there's been a focus on gasoline prices and the war in Iran, and now the Fed, but there are other sources of economic chaos or weakness resulting from a number of other policies coming out of this administration. Like suddenly tariffs are not even under discussion, and yet that continues to be, I think, a long-term drag on the economy, and just kind of the chaos of executive orders that are punishing some companies and favoring others, and I think you hear a lot in the news when small business owners are being asked about the economic situation, and they're really feeling the pain of tariffs still, even though the initial round of tariffs were sort of rescinded by the Supreme Court. But those small business owners are not, they're not in a line to get any of the rebates that are mandated now as a result of the Supreme Court decision. It's the importers themselves, the shipping companies. They're the ones that paid the import tax, the tariffs, and they're the ones that are going to get compensated, even if they had passed those costs on to the businesses. And it just seems that the thing that this administration has forgotten is that often the tariff impact falls heavily on producers that want to purchase these inputs on the world markets, and it's just raising their costs. So I'm not at all optimistic about affairs, even if the war in Iran were to be terminated and the straits were open.
Got it. Thank you. Looks like we have another question. Taisha?
Yes, thank you so much for this information. I missed the first 5 minutes, so I apologize if my question is related to that. But Nicole, when you mentioned scenarios, it got me thinking of the water supply scenarios. And I'm curious the intersection with the scenario planning that happened for these forecasts and how that aligns with the very concerning scenarios that were presented by our water department on July 31st, 2025. I also just did a control F on the document to just find water. I do that in every, spoiler alert, I do that every time I read a document. I find out how many times water is mentioned. Water is mentioned 3 times, and it actually is just mentioned on the same line about water, stormwater, wastewater. That's it. That's the only time. And so I'm very curious, how was water considered? And then the second part of that is specific to the water scenarios that were presented by Joe and his team last July.
Yeah, well, the most direct answer is that we don't really have a variable in our model that captures water supply.
So what do
it's not that type of model, but
okay. So what do we do? What can we do?
Oh yeah, I'm getting there.
Okay.
That's one of the reasons that we provide these alternative scenarios that, for example, we can't anticipate, or we say we couldn't a year and a half ago, anticipate that there would be such a disastrous winter for the ski season and the snowpack and what's happening now. So, so to handle those unanticipated shocks, that's why we present this range of forecasts, and
right.
And so we like to have the finance experts working for the city to make a decision about whether they want to adjust these down.
Thank you. So just to clarify, water was not considered, and the evidence that we have, the very deep evidence that we have on the water bankruptcy per the United Nations, they're not calling it a water crisis anymore. They're calling it water bankruptcy. And as we look around the room, most of the things that you see in that room came on a shipping container across an ocean. And so, you know, again, I appreciate the energy conversation, but I am disappointed by the water. Will there be an opportunity to provide feedback, or what's the next step on this? Is this just question time?
Yeah, this is focused on the financial forecast right now. And
is it just questions, or is it comments on?
It's one question, and then we're going to go on to the next segment, and then we will have 2 more questions for council.
Around finance?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. Then I'll hold for that, but it was very helpful to know that water and water projections weren't considered in this. I'm also curious on just, I heard you talk about oil prices, but I didn't hear you talk much about and I didn't see it in the document either, just the petrodollar and just the valuation issues that are happening with the, many countries not transacting in the dollar anymore as it relates to oil, and the impact that has on our economic forecasts.
Well, to the extent it would appear in the forecast, it would appear in the Moody's macro forecast, and it would be under the category, and Professor McNown can correct me if I go off base here, but it's under the category of stability of the dollar and international trade, which is built into their national macro forecast.
And I apologize, I only read the 17 pages. Was there a link to the deeper dives that you're indicating for the Moody's analysis? What I got was 17 pages. Did I miss something?
We describe the scenarios in there, and then we provide the longer description to city staff.
So I'm sorry, my question was, did I have access to the information that you were sharing around the dollar? Or was that only provided to staff?
I don't think you had access to it. It wasn't in the report, I should say. Okay,
thank you very much. That's the end of my questions, Rob. Thank you.
Okay,
Rob, can I just offer a point of clarification real quick?
Yeah.
Just help. I was actually really struggling through that last little bit. I just have to say it. That was not working well for me and landing well with me with interrupting our distinguished speakers And so I just want to hope that all of us can just respect our distinguished speakers.
I'm sorry. Are you trying to give me?
That just didn't. Yeah, I just have to say
I don't. Although I appreciate, as we are. I'm sorry, speakers. We are a self-governing body, so I appreciate us using this. I'm saddened that that was how you felt that I impacted you, Matt. But honestly, it is a significant. I am so concerned. And I actually was asking direct questions, and I was not getting the answer to the direct questions that I was asking. So, although I hear you, and I will continue as a former commissioner for Colorado Parks and Wildlife, and all of the different things that I do, to be as respectful as I can.
Okay,
Thank you.
We don't need the resume. We know where you've been.
We're wasting time.
My point
I hear you.
But
my point is, I hear you.
It's Rob's decision.
I hear you.
It's Rob to control the meeting. We just need to have respect for our distinguished speakers.
What I don't appreciate this. And I'm wondering on the council procedure, what the process is. I heard your complaint and I said, I'm sorry you feel that way. Your feelings matter to me. And it was not my expectation to disrespect our experts. However, it was my my right as a council member to ask them clarifying questions related to the information that we as council members and the public is provided on this very critical matter of our finances. Thank you so much. Rob?
Okay, let me reframe this. We're going to turn this over to Krista. She's going to finish up the second portion. We're going to ask one question after Krista's done, one. And we can ask a clarifying question, but let's try to stay focused on the financial forecast, and then we move into the next one on ballot measures. I know there are a lot of ancillary things that tie into this, but I just want to make sure that we're focused and we have this limited time, So I'm going to turn this over to Krista.
Yes, thank you for that. And Scott Carpenter, Principal Budget Analyst, is going to pull up the city's financial forecast specific to the utilities and the water scenario questions. Councilperson Adams, we will work with utilities as they develop their 27 budget to get more information there. So with that, I'm going to hand this over to Scott Carpenter to provide the financial forecast, which is informed by the information that you just saw from CU.
Thank you very much, Krista, and good evening, Council. I'm Scott Carpenter, Principal Budget Analyst for the Central Budget team within the city's Finance Department. Happy to be presenting the 2026 financial forecast tonight. For tonight's agenda, there will be a recap of the actions completed in 2025 and 2026 to balance the city's budget, and a preview of the key considerations for the 2027 budget. Next will be an overview of our current forecasts for the city's major revenues, sales and use tax, and property tax. After that, we will discuss general overviews of the assumptions, considerations, and the work that will inform the 2027 budget, including the 2027 through 2032 capital improvement program, such as budgeting for resilience and equity, and the long-term financial strategy. The 2026 budget was developed during a time of increased uncertainty and as the city revised down its forecast due to a flattening of major revenue sources. As forecasts were adjusted down, an $8 to $10 million potential shortfall was identified within the city's general fund for 2025. To close this gap, the city implemented a hiring freeze in June 2025, requested for departments to achieve 5% operating savings, and made some one-time reductions to internal fund transfers and special revenue fund subsidies. At the same time, a $7.5 million budget shortfall was identified in the general fund for 2026. For 2026 budget development, reductions were requested from departments, and while the city has emphasized realignments over the last 2 years, we placed an additional emphasis on program and fund realignments to help maximize flexibility across all city funds. An example of the careful consideration that was taken to close this shortfall and implement reductions and realignments in a way that did not impact service levels was CARE and CERT. The performance of the CARE program was analyzed and it demonstrated low call volume for non-police behavioral health response calls, while we saw a 60% increase in response to behavioral health calls with police for CERT. The CARE program was reduced and restructured into a cross-functional behavioral health response team for more effective use of staff time and prioritization of calls, allowing for the city to continue compassionate, professional behavioral health response to community members experiencing crisis in a more flexible and cost-effective manner with or without the presence of police officers. Overall, these actions led to limited enhancements citywide and a 7.8% decrease in the city's general fund budget. Based on the steps taken in 2025 and 2026, the city is not anticipating needing to implement any additional actions taken to balance the 2026 budget, but we will continue to monitor. For the 2027 recommended budget, the city is continuing to see a flattening of its major revenue sources due to the impact of state legislation and lack of growth with property taxes, and economic uncertainty leading to a flattening of sales and use tax, particularly retail sales tax. For the 2027 budget, a $6.5 million shortfall has been identified in the general fund. As a result, 4% reductions are being requested across all departments, particularly those primarily funded by sales and use tax and property tax. The budget direction emphasizes ongoing reductions, realignments of dollars towards highest use, taking care of existing assets and core services, and reviewing flexibility across all city funds. This year, we will be continuing to focus on understanding the criticality of city services and the performance of our programs and their alignment and the alignment of those programs and services to the SARE framework and citywide strategic plan. We will continue our work on the long-term financial strategy and budgeting for resilience and equity, which strengthen our foundation for budgeting and financial planning. While it can seem as though this impact to the budget has been sudden, it is important to note that issues between expense and revenue growth were noted within the Blueprint Commission reports from 2008 and 2010, where they predicted a $90 million deficit in the general fund by 2030 due to projected expenses growing at 4% compared to revenues growing at 3%. Now, I will move on to the city's major revenue sources, beginning with sales and use tax. As a reminder, the city of Boulder receives 43 cents of every retail tax dollar that is collected in Boulder. Sales and use tax is comprised of retail sales tax, business and consumer use tax, construction use tax, motor vehicle use tax, and audit revenues. Additionally, of the 43 cents collected from each dollar, it is then distributed across 6 funds: Open Space Fund, Transportation Fund, Community Culture Resilience and Safety Fund, the 0.25 Parks and Rec Sales Tax Fund, the Arts, Culture, and Heritage Fund, and the General Fund. 5 of those 6 funds are dedicated. These next 2 slides show the same information, with the second slide having an additional graphical representation. This table shows sales and use tax actuals from 2022 through 2025 by category, with additional columns to show the 2025 and 2026 budget and the current 2026 forecast. After experiencing a 1% decline in 2024 from 2023, in 2025, we saw a 2.8% increase compared to 2024. However, actual revenues came in below budget. Currently, we are not forecasting growth from 2025 to 2026, and we are now anticipating revenues to come in under the 2026 budget. As I mentioned previously, this is primarily due to retail sales tax. In the first row is retail sales tax, which accounts for approximately 80% of the city's sales and use tax revenue each year. Since 2022, retail sales tax has been flattening, with annual growth over the last several years around only 1%. And we are currently forecasting a slight decline in 2026 from 2025. For the 3.5% recreational marijuana sales tax, you can see it's a continuous decline from 2022 through 2025 from 1.7 million to 1 million. Before I discuss the use taxes, I want to note that use taxes can be more variable, particularly construction use. For consumer and business use, you can see that the city has experienced a decline since 2022, though we are anticipating a rebound for 2026. For construction use tax, you can see the variability that I mentioned with increases and decreases from 2022 through 2025. With how variable this revenue is, we consider this as more of a one-time revenue, and we are anticipating a decline in 2026 after experiencing stronger than anticipated actuals for 2025. Motor vehicle use tax has been stable, and we anticipate an increase in 2026. Finally, with sales tax audits, we have outperformed budget since 2023. However, these are considered one-time revenues and can fluctuate each year. This is the graphical representation of the last slide. You can see how our retail sales tax accounts for approximately 80% of sales and use tax each year, with construction use tax fluctuating between 7 to 10%, consumer and business ranging between 6 to 8, and motor vehicle use tax coming in around 4%. As I progress through this chart, it will show the downward shift in our forecasts. It's the forecast that informed the 2025 budget, shown in red. The light blue is the July 2025 forecast, which informed the 2026 budget. And the black is the current revised forecast for 2026 through 2032 with our 2025 actuals. As mentioned, the forecasted revenues for 2026 reflect slowing growth with an anticipated contraction. Compared to the 2025 budget, we are seeing a $5 million decline in anticipated revenues for 2026 and a $3.6 million decline in anticipated revenues for 2027. This is due in large part to the uncertainty of economic conditions resulting from tariffs, inflations, and overseas conflict. Additionally, we continue to anticipate downside risk as the city could be uniquely impacted by future federal decisions as the Boulder economy is strengthened by CU and the federal labs. The main takeaway is that over the last 2 budget cycles, the city has revised the sales and use tax forecast down by over $8.5 million in 2026 and 2027. Moving on to our next largest revenue source, property tax. This comprises approximately 12 to 15% of city revenues. The city accounts for approximately 13% of the mill levy, meaning that we receive 13 cents of every dollar of property tax collected. For 2026, $100,000 of actual home value results in approximately $73 of city property taxes. As a reminder, property tax values are reassessed every odd year. 2025 property reassessments will inform revenue for the 2026 and 2027 budget. Due to state legislation over the last several years and its continued impact on future years, we have seen a reduction in assessment rates and the establishment of actual value reductions. This has reduced potential revenue growth and flattened assessed values. This table shows property tax actuals from 2023 through 2025 with added columns for the 2025 and 26 budget and 2026 forecast. Due to the combination of less growth in property values and state legislation impacting assessed values, the city revised down property tax projections by $7 million from the forecast used for the 2026 budget. So approximately 40% of that impact is due to state legislation and 60% is due to the lack of growth. The city is revising down the current property tax forecast for 2026 by 3.1% or $1.8 million based on the decline experienced between the preliminary and the final assessed values received from Boulder County. This is due to the impact of appeals, and 2/3 of the reduced assessed value was due to commercial property appeals. In addition to the impact from state legislation that has lowered assessment rates and implemented actual value reductions, the city saw its worst reassessment cycle growth since the housing crisis resulting from the Great Recession. Actual value growth across all property types was only 0.2%, with assessed value declining by 1.4%. We had anticipated much more growth, as the average growth during the reassessment cycles from 2013 through 2023 was over 14%. That wraps up the forecast updates to the city's major revenues, and now I'll just discuss 2027 budget development and direction. Recapping the earlier slide, we are We are seeing continued financial limitations due to the flattening of major revenues and increased economic uncertainty. Federal decisions are contributing to these conditions, with uncertainty on federal grants and impacts to our local major employers. The long-term financial strategy will continue to inform our budget as we bring forward ballot measures, seek alternative funding opportunities, analyze the results of our Fund Our Future and community engagement, and look for strategies to address our unfunded and underfunded infrastructure needs. The 2027 budget will continue to emphasize realignments of existing programs, taking care of existing assets, and looking for flexibility across all city funds. Throughout all of this is the heightened importance of the SARE and citywide strategic plan alignment and the utilization of outcomes and performance data to support strategic decision-making. We are planning for limited to no new funding requests or program expansions. All departments will be preparing and submitting ongoing funding reduction strategies to help close an identified general fund shortfall, and we will continue to review and explore revenue opportunities. As a reminder, last year, the city focused on realignments and reductions with a similar emphasis on program performance and strategic organizational alignment. This led to an 11.6% decrease in the citywide budget, a 2% increase in the citywide operating budget, the slowest since 2021, and a 7.8% decrease in the general fund. As mentioned during the April Facilities Financial Landscape meeting, the city has a significant backlog of infrastructure renovation, replacement, and maintenance projects, and this will be a major focus of the 2027 through 2032 capital improvement program. With much of that backlog being underfunded or unfunded, we will continue to emphasize taking care of existing assets to help address the backlog. The city will also be mindful about balancing investments in ongoing maintenance of existing infrastructure and larger renovations and replacements. The 2027 budget will continue to utilize the principles of budgeting for resilience and equity, using outcomes and performance data to support strategic decision-making and organizational resiliency, with continued efforts to refine our outcomes. The budget will continue to align dollars with the SARE framework, citywide strategic plan, city council priorities, the Boulder Valley Comprehensive Plan, and community engagement, particularly the recent Fund Our Future engagement on the city's service levels. All of these things will help us inform the strategic reductions, realignments, and how we leverage flexibility of funding across all city funds. Additionally, we want to understand the criticality of city services to ensure funding in core services. In 2026, the key focus areas of the long-term financial strategy will inform and impact the 2027 budget. There will be the development of a 5-year comprehensive financial plan, the prioritization and evaluation of additional revenue opportunities, the Fund Our Future community conversations on service level trade-offs, and developing potential 2026 tax ballot measures within the broader multi-year ballot measure strategy. This slide shows the remaining budget development calendar, starting with tonight's conversations on the financial forecast and potential ballot measures, leading into department budget submissions in mid-June, budget decision-making on those submissions by the executive budget team in July. During the executive budget team meetings, requests and changes to the budget are evaluated based on the outcomes and performance data by program, their alignment to SARE goals, the citywide strategic plan, community engagement results, and then ultimately the publication of the city manager's recommended budget on August 28th. After publication, there is a city council study session on the recommended budget on September 10th, followed by first and second reading on October 1st and 15th. And with that, that brings me to the closing questions to wrap up tonight's presentation on the financial forecast. Does council have any questions regarding the 2025 preliminary unaudited year-end financial results of our major revenues? Does council have any questions regarding the 2027 budget, economic outlook, and key budget assumptions? Thank you.
Scott, thank you very much for the presentation, and same to you, Krista. Looks like we have a couple questions. Tara?
Yes. Are we doing one question still?
One question, please.
Okay, I'll do
Because
my
then we're
one
going to go to
question.
the questions for council, clarifying questions.
Okay. We talked about, I think it was on page 4, and you also mentioned it, about the city using program outcomes and performance measures. So you did mention one thing that we cut because there wasn't enough outcome for the what we put into it. That was, I think it was the CARE program. Is there any other programs that we have cut because of performance measures? I think it will be good for the community to know that we are tightening our belt, since we're going to be asking them for to poll on these ballot measures.
I don't have specific examples at the top of mind right at this moment, but we could take a look and bring some back forward.
And I'll just remind, I think you're right, Scott, as we're thinking about that. In some situations where we made reductions, we also made changes to programs to actually provide services in a different way. And while I can't recall the exact number of, unfortunately, staff that we lost last year, quite frankly, and it is a hard conversation that we will be having again with departments this year as we relook at programs and thinking about meeting our 4%.
Thank you, Tara. Mark.
Well, I had 2 questions, but I'm going to limit it to one. I'm going to follow up on Tara's question, which was pretty much mine. It seems to me you have a little bit of a PR problem that I'm asking you how you would like to address it. In the last couple of years, you've closed a couple of significant gaps, yet there's very little detail about how you did it. And I agree with Tara. I think the community would like to know how we get to that and how we're actually dealing with this. And I'm wondering, is that something you can successfully address it? Because there's a perception out there that all we do is spend like drunken sailors, and it's not true. And we are dealing with some difficult financial conditions. And I guess I'm asking, is there a better way for you to get that information out to the community so they'll know exactly how we're dealing with this hardship?
Maybe I'll take a stab at that for our team, but I appreciate that. It is something that we are trying to continue to deliver those messages. Sometimes it is changes in programs, as you saw. Sometimes it's reduction in service levels. We talked about that last year in our budget message. We will likely be bringing that forward again in terms of what does that look like, because we want to be transparent with community where we have that. So I'll take that back. We'll continue to think with our comms team, how do we share out those changes, reductions both in personnel or in service levels, because sometimes it's not about people and it's about how much, whether or not, for example, Spruce Pool was able to be opened or not. Those hours have changed last year, if you recall. So we'll be working with our team to make sure that we can think about it and quantify it in ways that hopefully will get through to community who I know are asking us the same questions.
Okay, I encourage you to do that. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Tina.
Yeah, thank you. One quick question, just going back to the Blue Ribbon report that predicted that this would be kind of our future at the time. Do we feel, given the information we have from that and overlaying the great presentation from our friends over at CU, do we feel like we're preparing ourselves adequately for the next few years? And I was surprised to see that I thought we're actually pretty optimistic sales tax projections from the team over at CU. But are we doing enough as a city to prepare ourselves, or are we going to be having the same conversation, even if we do the capital taxes, but we're still going to have the operating fund deficits every year. So how do we feel like we're on track, that we found sort of a pathway?
Yeah, Tina, I'll jump in here. So really, this council's prioritization in the long-term financial strategy has set some of this framework. In the fall or late 2026, you will see a long-term comprehensive plan coming. This work continues beyond our current year. And that's how we're really focused on getting ahead of this conversation. It'll be a combination of revenue strategies, measures of fiscal health, cost containment measures, and strategies to do that. So that is the very embodiment of this work to come back in a multi-year plan coming at the end of 2026.
Thank you. Nicole?
Thanks. I just have a quick question. Thinking back to the economic forecasts, the projections, high, low, optimistic, pessimistic, those, which one are we using for these projections?
Medium.
Okay, thank you. So wait, okay, sorry, I was going to get into a second question.
I appreciate you, Nicole. I will just chime in that I definitely agree with my colleagues regarding the transparency of some of these reductions, cost cuttings, realignments, and changes for the public to see what we're doing on the other end. We get a lot of reports for us on financial strategies and moving forward, but it would be really great to have that other side of the balance sheet for people to really see. So that being said, I'm going to put a bow on this one and ask question number one. Does council have any questions regarding the 2025 preliminary unaudited year-end financial results? Seeing no hands. Does council have any questions regarding the 2027 budget economic outlook and key budget assumptions? Also seeing, oh, we've got some hands. Nicole.
I'm going to ask my other question now because it relates to this one. My question is like the medium one. I am just curious as to what got us to medium. My intuition would be more pessimistic. So like but you know, you all have seen these numbers for decades, and so just really curious as to what led to that one.
Sure. So in discussion with our partners at CU, we felt that the medium scenario was a good combination of the optimism and pessimism. Richard was noting that we were continuing to see GDP growth despite some of the other negative indicators, and so felt like it was comfortable landing in medium.
It's not a high growth scenario. But it's a growth scenario. I mean, to be fair.
Okay. Looks like Tina's next.
Yeah, am I allowed to ask a question about the process of the 2027 budget?
Okay. Sure.
Okay, great. So we get the budget, it's released on August 28th, and then we'll have it to review between August 28th and September 10th. And then at that study session, is that a time when if there was an idea that we had or a thought we had about those changes, that it could actually be incorporated in the budget? Or is that something that should happen in conversations prior to the 28th? And I bring it up because this is a very high level forecast and very high level assumptions. So just kind of curious what that looks like.
I appreciate the question. I'll jump in there. And I would say if there are thoughts council is having about the budget, I welcome them throughout this entire period, right? I'll be developing the budget with our executive budget team, mostly through the month of July as we get some of the requests from departments. And it is a long process to dive deep and question and make some determinations about some of those realignments that is based on the financial forecast, but decisions haven't been made yet. And so if you have concerns and ideas, happy to hear them ahead of time. But certainly we have had conversations at the study session about how that budget looks once it's released, and some requests or some diving in deep. And so there's also that opportunity. We have a variety of public hearings set for the budget, so we will also hear from community. I only just note that with our 1-year budget cycle, we are always tight on time. My plug for a 2-year budget cycle would actually allow us for more conversations with you all. And so that's something to think about in the future as you're contemplating a desire to talk more about budget, but it is very hard to get those conversations in during the single year.
Thank you for that. Taisha. Taisha, you're muted.
Oh, my apologies. Thank you so much. So it's very helpful to get the big aggregated numbers, but I'm curious and set up for the budgeting process for 2027 if it's possible to get more actuals or expenses versus actuals, like from a programmatic instead of just the departmental, and specifically for those projects that are kind of larger than some of the other projects. So just was curious about the opportunities in getting access to that data, to that grain size of data.
Councilmember, and I don't know, Krista, if you were about to jump in, but certainly a lot, some of that data likely exists already on OpenGov, and we can get a report depending on exactly what you may be desiring, and we can certainly have a conversation and see what that looks like. I know that the finance team has some of those reports that they use to monitor and track what we do. And so it may just require additional information to know exactly those specific projects you may be looking for and so forth.
Right.
Krista, is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay.
Yeah, if you would give us some specifics of what you're looking for, and to Nuria's earlier point, any feedback on the budget process. We are starting that with departments now, and Nuria and myself and the executive budget team. So any information, if you'd pass that along to the city manager.
Okay, because I'm getting asked by different community members and organizations about like the cost of Alpine budget, budgeted versus actuals, Iris, just some of the larger construction projects, some of the transportation projects. So just having that, and I know all of this is available, but it's like having 100 doctors when you go into that in that portal. And so just getting the grain size would be really helpful. So that's the only questions that I have for 2027 is just getting that budget versus actual information, especially since some of the actually the majority of the items that are for the projecting budget for outcomes is still output data, because we're still in the process of getting some of that performance data. Thank you. How was that? Was that tone good? Just kidding. I couldn't help myself. All right, go ahead.
And Rob, if I could add, I think there was a really important questions at the beginning that I just want to address. If the actual summary of the budget and significant changes are available in the budget in brief, and it's a nice snapshot view. I think it's really just a department by department view of changes to the budget. So in there, you can see significant reductions, and it goes at the programmatic view. So I did want to share that. We can send the link to that, but that is available on the city's adopted budget website. It is the budget in brief portion of that, and it breaks down significant changes in the annual budget.
Appreciate that. Mark.
Krista, just as a side note, I read that budget in brief and the whole budget religiously every year. And I think most community members do not derive the kind of information that they would like to from that document in terms of direct understanding of what is going on, what the changes are, et cetera. So I urge a more straightforward document, because the one that we have is problematic to me.
I appreciate that feedback.
And it seems to me there's a tension here. We are doing, I think, a terrific job of dealing with very difficult economic circumstances and doing the reductions that are necessary to keep our budget in balance. At the same time, we are about to consider going out to the community with requests for a vast array of additional funding for capital improvements projects. How are we going to market both of those at the same time? I mean, it seems to me that people are going to have a problem with that, and I very much support the capital improvement projects, but I'm not sure how we're going to get that across in a way that's going to pass electoral muster. Have you given any thought to that subject?
We've given a lot of thought to that subject, Councilmember Wallach. It is, and I will say that we knew these would be hard conversations when we went so publicly with, let's talk about where we are and let's talk about where our funding is. As you heard earlier today in the presentation, it's not a new issue. I mean, the Blue Ribbon Commission has been signaling this for a while, and here we are. And certainly we have added more issues to that. So I think we continue to do a variety of different levels. We've done some community engagement, the Fund Our Future survey, and you will see that at some point, I think in the summer, so soon, I think was helpful in educating some folks. We will continue to think about what does that look like, because there is a difference between the programs, personnel costs that are rising, and then all the capital improvement unmet needs, right? It's all issues that we need to address holistically, and I think that has been the interesting aspect of this conversation with community, is that we have been very intentional about sharing where we are as an organization completely, but we need to continue to think about, are there better ways, deeper ways, different ways to continue to raise this issue as we raise awareness and go about thinking about our significant unmet capital and infrastructure needs.
We've already had our first email saying, hey, if you just cut out all the wasted funds from our operating budget, we could fund all of those capital improvements just from that. And you roll your eyes, and but it's a problem. It's a communication issue that we're going to have to deal with.
It absolutely is, and unfortunately, what we will likely continue to see is where people may ask us to cut is where they may believe has less value, whereas others put value on different things. And so we will continue to maneuver through that and really talk about the quality of services, the service demands that community has made over the years, right? We didn't come up with services at pulling them out of a hat. There was a need for that as that moved forward. And what could happen, what the impact might be if we reduce. What does that look like, right? So I think it's a complicated and challenging conversation, but we are here for it as we really think about the stability of our organization's finances.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate it.
Rob, am I next, or you might be on mute? I think you said yes, though.
I was on mute. Thank you. Yes. Sorry about that, Ryan.
Okay. Do we have comments too after this for the financial, or is this sort of it? We're just this is
it for the financial, and then we're going into the ballot measures.
Okay. Can I ask two questions?
I'll
ask one question. I agree.
Consolidate it.
That's fine. So thanks, team, for all this. Just can you just talk about Sundance and the plan to incorporate Sundance into our financial projections as things become clear? Thank you.
I can jump in to start. So as we collect the actual revenue from Sundance for sales and use tax, it will be incorporated into the sales tax model. We are taking a realistic approach in year one of Sundance, trying to get a very concise and clear picture of 2027 revenues, but also 2027 expenses, and making sure that we do not over program any revenue that we have not yet received. So for year one, we are going to be very cautious in our approach to Sundance.
Okay. That wraps up our financial forecast. I want to thank Richard, Brian, and Robert from CU for contributing that information. A little bit dire, but very important. We're going to move on to the next topic now. For the second presentation on ballot measures, staff has divided the presentation into 3 parts. So we'll stop at each part, ask for clarifying questions, and then have our discussion before moving on to the next session. And now I will turn it back to Nuria for the item.
Thank you so much, Councilmember. And our next item is a follow-up from previous conversations. So it feels like we as a community have been having similar conversations for many years. And in fact, we just touched on some of that in our first presentation. We mentioned it just briefly that the Blue Ribbon Commission study was already signaling decreased sales tax and increases in inflation rates that would impact the operation of city offices and rec centers, construction and transportation costs, personnel costs, building materials, etc. All of those issues continue to exist today with additional demand for services in community. We have shifted some sales tax away from the general fund, increases in inflation that also, as we keep up with the market on personnel, and then sales tax continues to flatten. So I will say that in looking back at the Blue Ribbon report, I feel a little deflated that even then they were calling our city's finances constrained. So this is not my word. It seems like it has been around for a bit. We have been charting a longer term strategy for the past few years, and I will say that I am tremendously grateful to you, Council, who recognized the criticality of this work by naming it a council priority previously, the financial expertise of staff who are giving us the right financial data we need to have necessary, though hard, conversations, and departments who've been really thoughtful at looking their programs to address these shortfalls in the past years and have again been asked the difficult task of making reductions in this year's budget as we continue to focus on retention and maintaining what we have as we're able to in the moment. But it is clear we cannot do that with existing funds and need help in securing additional revenues to address the backlog of unfunded needs across the city. And we hope to get your feedback and direction on the best ways to do that as we look at potential ballot measure items. So with that, I will pass it on to, I believe, Krista, it is coming to you.
Great. Thank you, Nuria. And one moment, we'll share our screen here. Thank you, Scott. All right, so this evening we are back again talking about 2026 potential ballot measures. Our agenda this evening, we will review the 2026 potential ballot measures and staff recommendations to include scenarios to address priority building infrastructure needs, both with existing authority and potential ballot measures. We'll discuss City Council Charter Committee recommendations. We'll provide an update on community-sponsored petitions. And then finally, discuss potential 2026 ballot measures for the state and region. So this is our conversation we've been having since March, and it is really, each conversation is building upon the next. So staff is providing council information with each conversation designed to inform the next to provide a comprehensive view of the city's financial position, analysis of any constraints or other considerations, alignment to the sustainability, equity, and resilience framework, and community priorities to ultimately inform the 2026 ballot measures. On March 12th, staff provided an update on the long-term financial strategy and presented a preview of 2026 ballot measures. On March 9th, staff provided an update on city facilities funding needs to include recreation centers. Unfunded infrastructure is one of several challenges Boulder is working to address with the long-term financial strategy. The purpose of tonight's meeting is to provide the current financial forecasts, to continue review of 2026 ballot measures, including scenarios to make progress in supporting unfunded priority capital investment needs, and to receive direction from council on which ballot measures and charter changes staff should proceed with polling. In speaking with Probolsky Research, they are our experts that we work with for polling. An optimal number of items to poll is 3 to 4. We might get away with 5, but just to put that in context as you're thinking about the items we're discussing tonight. In late June, staff will return with polling results. We'll also discuss recent community engagement, the Fund Our Future community engagement results. And in July and August, staff will look to council for review and approval of tax ballot measures for the November 2026 election. Next slide, please. So ballot measures are one component of the long-term financial strategy, which is a multifaceted approach to address decades of complicated issues. Restrictions of funding, lack of diversity in types of revenue, our heavy dependence on sales and use tax, more volatile to economic conditions, and unfunded infrastructure needs and underfunded programs. Named a top city council priority in 2024, the long-term financial strategy builds upon the recommendations of the Blue Ribbon Commission reports of 2008 and 2010 and focuses on taking care of what we have, addressing a backlog of needs. In April, you saw a view from our staff of the facility planning and asset management, so providing that comprehensive view of facility condition and needs. The long-term financial strategy focuses on prioritizing flexibility of funding to meet community needs and recognizing our challenges of restricted funding, and coordination of tax ballot measures with broader city financial planning, including alternative funding mechanisms and outcome-based budgeting, also to distribute the tax burden more equitably. Looking to 2026, our key focus in the long-term financial strategy, there are 4 categories here we're working on. The one we've touched on during the financial forecast, but we are developing a long-term comprehensive financial plan. This work continues beyond 2026. A long-term comprehensive financial plan is in development for delivery in late 2026 and will serve as a strategy to continue to address over the next years with revenue, financial policies, and service level decisions. The long-term plan will build upon the long-term financial strategy work in recent years, combining those revenue strategies, building on ballot sequencing and financial policy updates, as well as fiscal health indicators and continued refinement of the outcome-based budgeting framework. We're working on prioritizing and evaluating alternative revenue opportunities. We've also conducted Fund Our Future community conversations on service level trade-offs, and that again will be coming to you at the end of June, along with polling results. We're also working on tonight's focus, which is developing our potential 2026 tax ballot measures within the broader multi-year ballot strategy. So how we got here. About 68% of the revenue we collect is already committed for specific purposes. That's voter intent over decades. And it was built with what residents value. But it also means with every cycle, the general fund is constrained to sustain essential services while new and visible programs, emerging needs compete for every new dollar. Cities across Colorado and the country are working on the same pattern. The long-term comprehensive financial plan coming forward is how we get in front of this, not by undoing past decisions, but by sequencing the next one so renewals, sunsets, and new revenue reinforce others instead of colliding. So this is the chart of the general fund adopted budget from 2016 through 2026. Scott had a slide of Boulder's budget growth over the years in his financial forecast as well. In this chart, the blue line is budgeted expenditures, red line is budgeted revenue. The little green lines are our actual expenditures, and yellow is actual revenue. Kind of key takeaways from this chart. And if you would go to the next slide. In the general fund from 2016 to 2025, actual annual expense growth was 4.5%, outpacing revenue growth of 4.2%. More recently, from 2024 to 2026, this gap has widened with annual expense growth at 4.2%, while revenue growth is growing at 1.9%. To combat this growing gap, in 2025, we closed an $8 to $10 million shortfall through a hiring freeze and implementing a mid-year required 5% operational savings citywide. In 2026, we face closing a $7.5 million shortfall through implementing reductions and emphasized realignments, one-time internal service transfers and reductions of special revenue fund subsidies, leading to an overall 7.8% reduction in the general fund. I know this is a lot of news, but if you saw in that forecast, beyond in some of the out years, we really start to see a rebound. It is a modest rebound, but this is the point in time that we're at and measures we're having to take at this time. And we will look forward to that rebound ahead. So with that, I will turn this over to Scott Carpenter, Principal Budget Analyst, to provide an overview of the items we discussed in March, along with staff recommendations on those potential tax ballot measures.
Thank you very much, Krista. Scott Carpenter, Principal Budget Analyst. The potential 2026 tax ballot measures were developed as part of the multi-year ballot measure strategy, building on our efforts from last year's passage of the CCRS tax extension to have a more expanded approach, focusing on taking care of what we have and continuing to invest in our unmet needs. The options also incorporate prior council feedback to prioritize revenue flexibility and stability, understand the interaction between ballot measures and the broader long-term financial strategy, and focus on reducing tax burdens for historically excluded groups. This slide shows the range of ballot measure options discussed at the March 12th study session. Council reviewed the spectrum of ballot measure options and prioritized 4 tax ballot measure options to explore further. Those are highlighted in yellow. The options were the Parks and Public Improvement Mill Levy, or expansion of use only, the second Homes Residential Vacancy Excise Tax, the General Fund Debt Authorization, and the Public Realm Sales Tax consolidation of existing dedicated funds. The next few slides, I'll discuss those 4 potential tax ballot measure options and the staff recommendation. The Parks and Public Improvement Mill Levy is an option that was brought forward last year and would increase the city's property tax mill levy by 1.352 mils up to the max 13 mils allowable by charter. This would be specifically in the Permanent Parks and Recreation Fund and expands the usage of the fund to cover improvements for parks or other public improvements. or the option could just be to expand the usage without a tax increase. This would support funding for capital infrastructure, renovation, replacement, and maintenance projects, such as, but not limited to, parks, open space, civic buildings and areas, and the public right-of-way, including streets, sidewalks, bike lanes, and multi-use paths. Staff is recommending to consider this option and to move it forward to polling. More information on how this option can support priority facility needs is included ahead in the presentation. The next option is for a residential vacancy excise tax, also known as a second homes tax, creating an excise tax on residential properties that are deemed vacant at least 183 days in a calendar year. If passed, the city would be the first in Colorado to pass a vacancy excise tax, which comes with some risk as these types of measures haven't been vetted in Colorado's court system. State legislature attempted to produce enabling legislation for a vacant property or excise tax. However, that measure did not pass, but it could have the potential to succeed in future sessions. For the staff recommendation, staff is seeking feedback from council regarding the vacancy tax, specifically on if council would like to consider this further, if the scope of the potential tax should be for residential and or commercial property, any feedback on the structure, and whether to include this option for polling. This has a comparison that has been presented in the past and updated with current information showing rates, commercial vacancy options, and residential vacancy taxes for other cities. A summary of this additional research is that based on our comparative research, vacancy taxes are typically structured as a flat tax or a fee based on property type category, square footage, and or number of years vacant, ranging anywhere from $1,400 to $7,000 per unit. In addition, cities may include exemptions that apply to vacancy taxes or fees, such as financial hardship exemptions. Some communities have a fee, such as the city of Minneapolis. Others have a tax, tiered or flat, like the city of San Francisco. Next is the general fund debt authorization. This option will ask voters to authorize the general fund to issue debt. Currently, the general fund does not have the ability to issue any debt. The debt authorization doesn't increase revenue. Importantly, this means that when debt is authorized, there will need to be an offsetting reduction of services in the budget to pay for the debt service. The staff recommendation is to not consider this further for this year. This recommendation is driven by the current financial forecast and flattening of revenue requiring strategies for reductions in 2027. Given there is no additional revenue, issuance of debt in the general fund would require offsetting reductions. Staff recommends including general fund debt authorization in the long-term comprehensive plan for future year polling and ballot measures. And our final option is the public realm sales tax, which combines the dedicated sales tax increments that currently fund the open space, transportation, and Parks and Rec 0.25 sales tax fund into one fund and expands its usage to provide more flexibility. This option does not raise taxes, and the increased flexibility allows for better capital project planning across the entire city system and increases the city's ability to leverage financing options. Staff is recommending not to consider this further for this year, but staff, however, recommends this option be considered as part of the long-term comprehensive financial plan. And now I will turn it over to the city's Director of Facilities and Fleet, Joanna Cream.
Thanks so much. Good evening. I am going to provide a brief recap of the facilities investment strategy discussion from the April 9th study session. Next slide. So how did we get here? Our building portfolio and the current challenges we find ourselves in grew over the last 100 years, but we've been working on solutions for less than 5. And in the midst of that, mostly reacting to emergencies in our buildings. This is not an easy problem to solve, and it will take time. And while our challenge is a big one, we are not alone. The backlog of building maintenance is a nationwide crisis, made more challenging by the cost escalation of building equipment and materials, which is greatly outpacing revenue and funding sources. Next slide. The city has more than 75 buildings in our portfolio, most of which need investment. To make it manageable, we categorize the buildings, and we're currently focusing on the 15 priority buildings. These are the ones that keep us up at night. And tonight we'll discuss options to fund some of these buildings. Next slide. These are the priority buildings, the 15, and all of them provide vital services to our community and are crucial in supporting the delivery of services. They are all in decline, and we're chasing emergency repairs across all of them to keep them fully functional and operational. Using the key performance indicators from the facilities plan, we reassessed or reprioritized and ranked these buildings. And while some limited investments have helped some buildings hold steady, others have continued to slip, like our recreation centers. Our public safety building remains where it was in 2021, at the bottom of the list in the worst condition. Next slide. Due to failing conditions, at a minimum, the priority buildings need roughly $20 million over the next 5 to 6 years for capital major maintenance, simply to keep the buildings operational. In your council packet, attachment D lists the major maintenance projects for the priority buildings. And this is a good reference if community members ask questions or if you have questions. You provided feedback in April to find a way to fund these needs, which we can do by using CCRS funds. And I'll turn it back over to Krista so she can talk more about this and other funding scenarios.
Thank you, Joanna. So staff has prepared scenarios of how we can begin to address the unfunded priority facility needs through existing funding and potential ballot measure recommendations for polling. Next slide, please. This chart illustrates how each scenario A through E, and we'll go into detail ahead on each scenario, how each can begin to address priority facility investments. Staff is offering a mix of existing authority along with potential ballot measures. We aren't covering today's specific projects. The intent is for this to be informed through polling the community to determine acceptable funding thresholds and priority for improvements. So you can see in this chart, there's each of the 5 scenarios that we're presenting. The green line in this chart represents the $500 million need presented by staff in April for the priority facility investments. Scenario A through E is shown with estimated maximum funding each can provide. And with each scenario A through E, the blue line represents the $100 million of existing funding that we already have built into the capital planning. How each scenario can impact or help us address the unfunded $400 million need is represented in orange. We'll go into each scenario in detail ahead along with staff recommendations. A mixture of scenarios is recommended by staff for investment in critical facility needs. The greater the investment overall now, the less trade-offs will need to be made in the overall time horizon. Not addressing the facility needs will result in a higher cost of ownership as maintenance and emergency repair costs increase along with inflation and construction cost escalation. The ask of additional funding is not considered lightly, and staff has been building best practice standards in recent years, such as the facility investment model you saw in April, and budget standards of building in operating and maintenance costs into each building and major improvement, so we're not in this position in the future. So scenario A, this is existing authority through the CCRS fund. As part of the long-term financial strategy work of 2025, voters approved an extension of the CCRS tax in perpetuity. The city is grateful for this support and approval of the CCRS tax and added debt authority, a primary source for city facility improvements. The CCRS tax brings in approximately $13.9 million annually. The CCRS tax is currently programmed fully from 2026 through 2031 to support projects to include Fire Stations 2 and 4, the Civic Area, and East Boulder Community Center. The 2026 through 2031 CCRS CIP plan assumes the city will finance $74 million with a payback period of 10 years for the East Boulder Community Center, Civic Area, and Fire Station 2 projects. The annual repayment over that 10 years is $9 million annually. So what staff is proposing in scenario A, and next slide, please, is allowed and is possible due to voters authorizing a permanent extension of the CCRS tax. So staff is recommending that now, because the tax is extended in perpetuity, that we are now able to extend planned debt from 10 years to 20 years, reducing the amount of the debt service payment annually. That gives us additional capacity. And what staff is proposing is that the increased amount, $17 million, is to support the East Boulder Community Center renovations. And the additional $10 million is funded between 2026 and 2031 to support critical capital maintenance to extend the life of facilities. So Joanna just provided the slide showing critical repairs. We would carve out $10 million to support that to extend the life of facilities. Staff does recommend including this additional capacity allowed by the CCRS tax extension with the 2027 budget development. Scenario B, this is parks and public improvement expansion only. This would expand the use of the permanent parks and recreation mill levy to support funding for capital infrastructure, renovation, replacement, and maintenance projects and/or operation. This option provides flexibility for use of projects such as parks, open space, civic buildings, and areas. While this option provides flexibility, it does not add capacity to address unfunded needs. Staff is not recommending an expansion only. To address the $400 million priority facility investment needs, an increase in the mill levy is a viable option. To address the $400 million in priority facility needs from revenue alone, this would require a mill levy increase of 6.352 mills. And at the bottom of this table, you will see the estimated impact to residential and commercial property based on $1 million in property value. So that would be one item to increase the 6.352 mills, and that would arrive at the $400 million to address priority facility needs. We are facing decades of deferred maintenance and aging infrastructure, and the solutions offered in C through E's are intended to make progress at maybe a more affordable approach. This table provides a breakdown of each scenario of the estimated residential and commercial property tax increase based on $1 million in property value, total estimated annual revenue for each of the scenarios, as well as maximum debt capacity for each scenario, assuming we would finance over a 20-year repayment term. Scenario C, and we'll go into more detail ahead, is to expand the use of permanent parks and recreation tax as described in scenario B, but it increases the mill levy by 1.352 to the current max 13 mills authorized. Annual revenue from this increase is $6.6 million, and the maximum capacity if the city were to issue debt, we would be able to finance up to $80 million with a repayment term over 80 years. Looking at this table, the estimated property tax impact of scenario C is $85.50 of an increase in residential and $338 increase in commercial. Scenarios D and E are an additional funding mechanism that can help address priority facility investment needs, specifically through the issuance of general obligation bonds that would be payable through a mill levy set annually to service debt that will expire at the time the bond retires. We'll go into more detail ahead, but this is to provide a summary of the addition of each of the scenarios, with staff's actual recommendation being scenario C and E. That would provide $200 million of maximum capacity so that we can begin to make significant progress in the unfunded priority facility needs. Against the actual projects and threshold from the increase, we plan to be informed through polling ahead. So as mentioned, scenario C is the parks and public improvement mill levy increase and expansion of use. This would increase the permanent parks and recreation fund mill levy from 0.9 to 2.252 mills. The estimated annual revenue that would be generated is 6.6 million each year to address unfunded and underfunded facility and operational needs. With this regular revenue source, debt could be issued to make progress in priority facility needs. The prior slide breaks down, and you can see here, if we were to finance and use this revenue source as a dedicated source for that repayment, we could finance up to $80 million. Staff recommends polling and consideration to include in the 2026 ballot measures. Scenarios D and E, these are mill levy increases to specifically support debt. Under Section 94 of the Charter, the city can increase the city's mill levy above the 13 mill levy cap to specifically fund certain debts. This is an option that staff is recommending to help address the priority facility investment needs. With this option, general obligation debt would be issued and the mill levy set annually to support debt repayment. A benefit to this option is it allows the city to make progress on the large backlog of priority facility needs, and the mill levy will this increase will end when the debt retires. Additionally, the city will only issue bonds for projects when they're ready for major capital investments. So the mill levy will only increase when the bonds are issued. Scenarios D and E are illustrations of what is possible to begin addressing this significant amount of investment need. Polling again will inform acceptable funding thresholds and priority facility improvements. And staff is recommending scenario C and E, again, providing up to $200 million for facility needs. The impact of that, you can see here on residential property taxes, is an estimated $211.98. That's based on $1 million property value, and commercial estimated impact is $838 increase based on the $1 million property value. Next slide, thank you. So a limitation with this approach is language written in Section 97 of the Charter, limiting the city's indebtedness not to exceed 3% of assessed value of taxable property within the city, with bonds payable solely from ad valorem property taxes. This limits the city to approximately $150 million principal and interest in general obligation bonds. Other Colorado cities have similar limitations in their charter, with a 3% debt limitation on actual value of property in the city. Staff recommends proceeding with the charter amendment, changing the 3% limitation to actual value of taxable property, providing greater flexibility, along with pulling the mill levy increase specifically to support priority facility improvements. So that brings us to our council questions.
Thank you so much, Krista, Scott, and Joanna. I'm going to do the same thing again, just based on time. I'm going to limit everybody to one question, clarifying questions for staff. And I see some hands raised. Let me get in here. Tara.
Hold on. Did I take myself off mute? Good for me.
You're off mute.
All right, that's great. Okay. My question is this. I've gotten emails about how property taxes are affecting our commercial businesses, our local businesses. And you all know, and you told me that, and obviously from the charts, that what a person pays on their houses, the businesses, the commercial businesses pay way more. So we just had this extremely depressing, in my opinion, and pessimistic report about the state of our economy. And now I do have a question. Don't worry, Rob. And now it seems to me we're going to pressure, I'm not saying I'm against this, but we're going to pressure the businesses. What seems like per $1 million is obviously commercial businesses aren't $1 million. So I guess my question is, of all of these scenarios, which are and maybe you can answer this, which are going to pressure our businesses so much more, considering we already have that transportation maintenance fee that we just added on, by the way, right? That it is going to make our local business community, it's going to make it unsustainable for them, the commercial properties. So whereas I get that we need to fix our buildings, we also don't want to crush businesses. So in that sense, do you still have the same opinions about all of what we should pick? How does that make sense?
It
I
does.
know, I know you looked at it from the point of view as how do we solve all problems, but I don't want to make more problems with our commercial businesses like fleeing the state. So in that sense, what would you pick?
Well, and I'll start here, and maybe Chris, feel free to jump in, but I think that is the intent of polling, to really determine the threshold of which the community, both residential and commercial, is wanting, or what they're wanting to support for these facility needs. And I think that is really the purpose of polling ahead.
So just I'm sorry. So as an example of how much an average commercial property pays, what is an average square foot here? Because it's not like $588 per, in other words, do you have an approximate amount, or is that not, do you know what I'm saying? It's like not $588. It's considerably more than that. So I want the community to understand that, because it's not that obvious how much people are paying.
And I maybe jump in here. I'm wondering, Scott, if we could share the slide with the breakdown of residential and commercial. Tara, I don't know the average assessed value for businesses. And so I don't have that off the top of my head. We just have that amount right now broken down per million in that table.
And maybe I'll chime in and add. Chris Meschuk, Deputy City Manager of Tara. I think part of your question is, the range of difference for residential property values in the city. It's big, but it doesn't have as big of a range as commercial property. We've got some commercial properties that are commercial condos that are pretty small, that probably have an assessed value under $1 million, and then we've got big giant buildings that have an assessed value that is much greater than 1 million. So I think I hear your point of there's a lot more variation there, and understanding the true impact for commercial property is a little more complicated than residential property.
Okay, that's it.
Mark?
I first just want to chime in and say that Tara is correct. We need to understand the actual impact, not the theoretical impact of what we're doing. And we've had this conversation before, and we need to have it again and try to get a resolution on that. As for my question, I don't understand why we would not pursue the debt authorization, since it's not going to incur any taxes. It's not going to raise any taxes, and we're not going to use it this year. There's going to be a lag time for that. Why would we not want to pursue it if it's free? And just as a quick comment, I also support changing the definitions of the 3% limitation on debt from assessed value to market value. And I would think that combining it with another initiative that is not going to raise taxes would make people a little happier than the initiatives that do. So can you tell me why we wouldn't take the free one?
Yeah, Mark, I'll jump in here. So the thought is when we're considering polling, hearing from the experts, there is an optimal range of 3 to 4 items for polling. And the general fund debt, while it does allow capacity, there's no new revenue with it. So when we do utilize that, it will mean offsetting reductions. So since we're already planning for reductions in 2027, that if we were to issue debt would be additive. I do think it's something we would like to put in the long-term comprehensive plan ahead. It is a tool we would love to have in our toolbox ahead. But it is not something that would be planned for use over the next year or two.
Well, I guess I'm saying that the next time you'll be able to do it is 2028, and you still won't be able to use it immediately. And so we keep pushing the rock down the road. And if it's a good tool for us, I would prefer that we use it. That's all I've got.
Matt, you're up next.
Appreciate that, Rob. Thanks for this sobering presentation. This is why alcohol use is down, because we've been forced into sobriety by conversations like this. Mark's got his thumbs up. My question comes around centered on the other side of the equation. I think polling's going to be exceptional, and I'll phrase it here. I think polling's going to be very difficult unless we're really clear and focused on how we're reducing the expenses, not just of the city. We're working on that, and I know we're doing that, but specifically on our capital projects. They have been funded exceptionally high and at an exceptionally high standard. And we don't live in the environment where that's an acceptable norm anymore. And so here we are talking about all the more money we want to accrue and bring in. Where's the conversation where we're saying, hey, these projects that we are discussing, we're going to shave 20% off them because we have to. There's non-essential stuff that we actually can pull out of that or tweak. We need the other side of the equation here. And so I'm just wondering, where's that conversation? Where are we being clear, aside from just regular budget stuff, which I know we'll take care of in the budget, but on our capital projects? We're asking money for capital projects. Where are we reducing the cost on those existing ones so that we are balanced and we can stay true to our community that, hey, we're asking for money, but we're also tightening on our end too, and it isn't just additive.
So maybe I'll take that one. I see no rushing to the table. It's a hard conversation, right? And I think in that April conversation, you saw that we had presented some initial scenarios on the variations, low and high, of some of our facilities, right? Those are choices to be made as that moves forward. We don't know yet what those choices are going to be as we're still thinking about how do we even fund even the lowest portion of that. And I think polling might be helpful as we move forward. But as you know, with all projects, I think similar to the conversation we are having about critical service levels that departments are looking at now, what is the demand? What can we afford? What services should be at variety of facilities? We are categorizing some of that, and we will likely be coming to you all in the future to continue that conversation as I'm not recalling what dates there are, but those are continuous conversations we have to have about what you're talking about is service level and what amenities are in each of our facilities, right? Those give us some services as well.
Well, I'm actually not referring to services. I'm referring to actually the actual structures themselves. And now let's just take East Boulder Rec Center, for example. I'm not picking on it, but it's a massive, full, renewable energy, like green energy upgrades. Does it have to be? Can't it be a hybrid where we focus on maybe gas, but we do the hookups for electric, knowing that when our electric mix becomes truly green, that's when we do it and we delay that full conversion because it's a premium right now and we're actually just plugging into dirty power. So those are the things that I'm looking at is these aren't service level, these are actually structural in nature. And I'll just add the last piece I'll add is we keep saying we're having conversations. That's not working for community because here we're talking about a concrete thing that's going to hit their pocketbook. That's not a conversation. That's real. Where do we have the real impact on how we're reducing? So at some point, these temporally have to cross each other where we have to be clear on what our reductions are financially in order to gain the confidence of community to ask for more money.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And I guess to the same conversation we've also had at East Boulder Rec is what is the capacity for pool or swim lanes or whatever that's going to look like, right? That is a service that then has an infrastructure cost to it. Joanna, maybe you can better answer the question on energy because in part 2, we have a code that we need to lean into.
Yep. And apologies that Michelle Crane's not here because I know she would do an even better job than I will do. But it is actually hybrid at the East Boulder Community Center in terms of what we've been looking at. So certainly understand and acknowledge that we are trying to thread a needle with the expensive buildings. I mean, buildings are just expensive to build. And also trying to address and meet all the codes that we have and the regulations that we have to thread that needle in the most cost-effective manner. So absolutely hear the concern and also trying to balance the fact that we are the long-term owners of the building. So we also are trying to not cut any corners so that we end up with a larger total cost of ownership in the end. So we're trying to be thoughtful, but I can assure you we are always looking at and trying to find the most cost-effective manner to approach when we are building.
Cool. There's more to discuss here, but I appreciate the response we've gotten so far. Appreciate that.
Tina, you are up.
Hi. So I had a question about the last option where we raise the mill levy when we have identified the projects we want to work on and do the debt. My question is there a way to talk about it and pull it that can talk about the timing of when people would start paying more on their taxes? And part of it is I'm worried a little bit on the commercial side with the addition of the transportation maintenance fee, which would theoretically be coming in July or August at the same, and then 6 months later moving into a mill levy, if there might be a way to time those so it's not as impactful. And to some, and there we actually have a lot of property owners that will have to absorb those two large fee or tax at the same time.
Yeah, really appreciate that feedback. And I do think that is an area that we'd want to be really clear in the polling, is that the phasing of the projects and the timing, right? Because we're not going to be ready to break ground on $200 million worth of projects. And it's going to take time to do all the prep for those projects. So I do think that's something we would want to be very clear in the polling on the timing and the phasing of that.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Nicole.
My question is around thinking about some of the mill levy expansion and increase. And this is a little bit to Tara's point. Low-income homeowners and small profit businesses or nonprofits are going to be hit potentially disproportionately by any increase we do. is there any way of including like some amount of that ask that could be used kind of like we do with the food sales tax rebates, where we kind of give it back to folks who are really needing it, because I don't, we do need this funding for very critical things like public safety and rec centers and all that. And I wonder if there is a way that we could help to offset that with this same thing.
And I'm just, that is definitely something I think we can look into. I'm not sure if Chris would have any additional advisement there on from examples from other projects and experience.
Yeah, actually, I would say the same thing. Is I think that's an interesting thing to look into and explore further. And we've had that experience with especially like property owners that are annexing into the city that are on a fixed income, that then they need to pay for those infrastructure costs. And so we've had those conversations in the past where it wasn't necessarily their property taxes that were going up, but it was that they were going to have to make a big lump sum payment, and we were trying to figure out how to be able to work with that so that it didn't mean that they felt like they had to either not get clean drinking water or sell their house or that sort of thing. So I think we could explore that further and see if there are some options around that as a way to be able to maybe soften the impact or the increase.
Yeah.
Ryan.
I think my connection might be slow. If it is, I can turn off the video. I'll keep talking unless you signal. Okay, my question is the procedure forward from tonight. If as we go forward, presumably to do poll testing, do you ask for council's feedback on the language or the items that go into that poll testing? Like, will that happen tonight? Will that happen at all? How will that work?
So we're looking for council to provide advisement on which items to poll on. And that's what we're looking for tonight. And then we would work over the next several business days on formulating the questions in that poll.
Okay, so you're looking for that now. Okay, then Teresa.
Yes, council member. There are really specific legal requirements with respect to language for the ballot measures, and the polling relies heavily upon language. And so once council provides direction about which things to poll on, the city attorney's office works on that language.
Great. And then my just quick follow-up question is, so we've got these 75 facilities and the 15 critical facilities. The airport has not been considered usually in that domain. They've been sort of separate. I've seen a number of questions from the community that have come in today that have asked the question, could and should this polling process include consideration of airport? And I'm just wondering if staff's given this any thought. Like, is that something we should be giving feedback on? Or, yeah, how do you think about potentially including the airport in that?
Why don't I take this one? And I just wanted to say, furthermore to the deadlines, and perhaps Councilmember Benjamin, to your questions about when we're coming back. Survey results are coming back from the polling and the Fund Our Future results, which you have not all seen yet, in late June. And then later on in the summer, likely after your break, we will be reviewing and approving tax ballot ordinance. So we'll have some of those conversations at those times. Councilmember Shuhart, to your question about the airport, I will say that we have not thought about that as part of our potential items to date. If that is something that council wants us to be considering, or you want to think about as a polling measure, then certainly this is a lovely night to know that.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. I'm just gonna add my own question here. Why did staff decide not to use the general fund obligation or any other forms of debt? I understand that we would be using up all the revenue on some, but can staff help us understand what revenue conditions would create pressure on debt service and whether a stress test scenario has been modeled? I think that downside picture along the baseline forecasts will strengthen the credibility with voters.
So the general fund debt authority, if I'm understanding your question correctly, Rob, the general fund debt authority itself, the general fund is a balanced fund. So if we were to issue debt, that would we would need to put an expenditure, an additional expenditure for repayment of the debt. So there's no new revenue coming in, which would mean for any amount that we issue and have to repay, that would come with an offsetting service level reduction. So considering we're already planning for cuts in 2027, we would not plan to utilize any general fund debt in the year ahead, which is why it was an item that we want to consider moving to the long-term comprehensive plan and then talking about that in a future year.
Okay. I am going to move over to the main question now. Seeing that we have no other clarifying questions or comments, does council agree with staff's recommendation to explore through further analysis and polling parks and public improvement mill levy expansion and increase to provide flexibility for community needs, and up to $200 million debt and associated mill levy increase for unfunded priority facility improvements, and change section 97 of the charter to 3% of actual valuation of taxable property within the city? And looks like we have a question from Tara or a comment. Go ahead, Tara.
Yeah, I just have a quick question. And that is, are you going to give community members multiple options for how much property tax they'd be willing to, if any, pay in this polling? Or that's my first question. Or are you going to just pick one? And then my second question is are you going to mention the South Boulder Rec Center and the North Boulder Rec Center in the ballot measure polling, or is it too early and that's years away, or some other thing? Because we did get a lot of questions on that from the community as well. I want them to feel like they got answers to that question. So those are my two questions before I comment on anything else.
Krista, you want me to take this one? Perfect. So Tara, on your two questions, the first one in terms of like options, the recommendation as we wrote it in the memo is that we would pull the $200 million debt, and it would describe what, average increase for property tax would be. We do have the option that we have done in the past with pollsters before, and our pollster has confirmed we could do what they call a split sample. So if you were interested in polling, say, the $200 million option and the 80 or the 145 or the 400 option, we could do that. So you'd get a little bit of an insight from voters if they see that, oh, I would support one, but I wouldn't support the other. So that's an option for you. And then the second question is, are we going to list specific projects? And as Teresa answered in a previous question, when you poll for a ballot question, you actually write a ballot question right like it would be on the ballot in November. And then you get a voter reaction to it. Then you ask some further questions, and then you get a second reaction to it. So we'll have to put specific language in there. And that's for some of us, our tomorrow morning is having that exact conversation based on the feedback of which types of things you want us to poll, and then we'll be quickly drafting language. So hopefully that helps answer that question as well. Great.
Nuri, I'm going to ask you, when we asked this question about these 3 different points of the conversation, I'm hesitant to ask this. Is this through a straw poll?
I would say first, perhaps we see what council members have as a conversation before. It could be that we may not need a straw poll as much as we get some feedback. And if there perhaps is lack of clarity, we are happy to jump in and ask for that, because we're not usually shy about that. So
okay, thank you. Yeah, it looks like we do have a few more questions here. Go ahead, Mark.
Thank you. I would be supportive of polling, possibly a split poll on the 200 million, and because of the extent of our needs, I would take a shot and see if anybody will buy into the 400 million. I tend to doubt it, but you know, it's really dealing with the problem. I'm a little reluctant to have us poll on a tax exceeding our mill levy limitations for a project that's outside of that funding source we discussed earlier. And I'm a little concerned with raising the polling on raising the mill levy for parks and asking people to raise taxes on themselves for the 200 or the 400 or any of those alternatives. There's only so many taxes you can ask people to impose upon themselves in one voting cycle. And I think we're asking for 2 or 3, and I think it's not a good environment for doing that. I think we should pick one. I think it should be one of the funding sources that, you know, the 145, 200, 400, and see what people say. I would be happy to have the language change for open space and parks so that they can use their dedicated funds for maintenance. But I'm not sure I want to suggest an increase in the mill levy to our maximum and then throw more on the table. I don't think that's a formula for success. Thank you.
Nicole.
Thank you. So just to kind of go through this list, and we're just doing number 1, is that right, Rob?
That's right.
Yep. Okay. So for that one, I yes to polling on the Parks and Public Improvement mill levy. Though I personally like the name public safety and public places because that's what it seems to capture with this one. So I might just think about including public safety in as we're talking about that with the in the polling as we're getting ready for that. I agree with Mark that I think it would be good to do the 200 million, but also the 400 million option. I think that we definitely do need to include the specific projects, but right now we have people who are talking about the public safety building, who are talking about needing updated fire stations, who are talking about needing pools and updated rec centers. And if nothing else, even if the people responding to the poll say, no way in the world are we going to fund all of this, we can't do it right now. I think that at least gives us some information so that when we are having to say sorry to a new public safety building in the next 5 to 10 years, or sorry to a new South Boulder Rec Center in the next 5 or 10 years, we have some information to put that forward. And I think it shows respect to the community that we are giving an option for funding everything, at least in this poll, right? And if people are not having it, that's fine. But I really feel like we need to give people that choice, so that it's not just us assuming that people don't want to pay for extra. And I think if we can find a way to include something about having a small percent, kind of like the 1% for art, but like 1% for affordability in that we could use to help people offset the increased cost, people and small profit and nonprofit businesses. I think that would help too. So I would love to see that pulled with those two options. And then the other one, yes, I think to pulling the charter change, that does feel important. And I would actually advocate for potentially pulling the general fund debt one too, even though we don't need it yet. The community is currently aware of our financial issues in a way that I don't know will be true in 2 or 3 years because of turnover that's happening, and that always happens in our community. We have spent so much time helping educate people about this moment. I worry that that's going to pass. And even though it's a tool that we wouldn't use until the future, we could say, not before January 1st, 2029, or whenever that needs to be. But this to me feels like the year to include it, solely because of the package of things that we've been talking about for years now. I just really worry that if we don't put that in this year, we may lose the moment. So okay. Yep. That was it. Thank you.
Okay, Matt.
Thanks. Two things. I want to certainly echo the general fund debt authorization. I think that needs to be pulled. When we have things of substance, we need to give them a long runway and give them lots of oxygen. And even if we're not going to do it, polling it sends a signal that it's serious and it's bona fide. And even if we don't do it this year, getting some of that polling is helpful. And it allows us to know how much work we have to do, if at all, to build to a coalition and consensus that it is viable by next year. So I think that's a helpful, just to know where our floor is. So thanks, Nicole, for bringing that up. I also want to kind of go a little further than what Nicole was saying with regards to the trade-offs in the polling. It isn't just you don't get a new public safety building or you don't get a rec center. If we don't get this capital funding, it's, oh, the things you're currently used to getting go away. So we kind of keep getting caught in the conversation of, oh, then you just don't get the new thing. People are okay not getting the new thing, but people are not okay with the thing they currently have going away. And we have to communicate that. That is essential for the trade-off conversation to land appropriately. It's not hyperbole, it's just reality. And so I think that's so essential for us to make sure we do that and paint that picture accurately, whether it's in the polling or just our messaging. We're already talking about service reductions and other things. They need to know what that is, right? That needs to be painted out loud and clear so that they know the alternative. So I would just go a little further than Nicole, and yes to the general fund on the polling. Everything else looks great to me.
Great. Thanks, Matt.
If I may, Matt, I'm sorry.
Sorry.
Do you mind? Councilmember? Councilmember Benjamin, do you have a quantity that you think would be polling, whereas we think about the 200 and 400 came up? There was an option about any combination of the three.
Oh, I mean, I think the 200 is the right sweet spot. I think 400 is getting way over our skis, to be honest. If we limited in how much polling, right? We haven't even talked about vacancy and polling, Matt. So I want to make sure we don't have this long treatise of polling. I would exchange a $400 million question with a general fund debt authorization question. So
I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Great. Tina.
Yeah, thanks for explaining all this. And I felt like I have a better understanding with this presentation than the one we did prior. So I appreciate that. This is polling, so we're not making decisions now, where our community will ultimately be making the decision. And we're just offering some ideas, essentially. So I just wanted to reframe that for myself. I am going to go with staff's recommendation on these. And what's really important to me in this process is making sure that we can that it will help meet our goals, that we can communicate it clearly to the community, and that we can engage the community as much as we can, ideally doing something similar to the school district with the Citizens Bond Oversight Committee, so that we can engage the community in a conversation about facilities specifically long-term. So I think building that relationship is critical. And then just making sure that we can also start this narrative that I think will be coming out of the long-term financial 5-year plan, but just a clear idea of what the maintenance schedule looks like, you know, for the next couple decades would be extremely helpful. So yeah, I'm good with staff's recommendation on those 3 points. Thanks.
Just following up, Councilmember Mark, was that staff too has been thinking about a similar task force. It is used in other situations, other communities. We have been thinking about that as well. And so appreciate that and knowing that there is alignment.
Okay.
All right, Ryan.
I will endorse Nicole's comments. I think I just sort of agree with everything she said. So yes to the 3 that staff have brought forward. I like the consideration of some modified language around the parks and public improvement, but just I thought that was interesting. I would also add for polling, I'd like to see the 400. You know, I think one of the principles we've heard from finance is that the more we continue to defer these costs, the more expensive they will be in the future. And so I think at least getting the public to weigh in on whether, you know, there's an interest in having a holistic approach that will have the lowest net cost. I think we owe that to the public right now, especially with all of this work that we've done. So I'd support that. And, you know, I think there's techniques to do like A/B testing and, you know, really get between the 200 and the 400 and really get a read on how people react to the differences between those two things. And I like the idea of like a pretty big tent approach to what we're asking for. And if there's space, I would put the airport in here too. I mean, we just heard that this facility has needs, and might as well add it to the polling. So leave it at that. Thanks.
Thanks, Ryan. Aaron?
Yeah, well, staff, thanks for all the very hard and excellent work on bringing these options forward to us. There are, of course, many unmet needs in our facilities. We hear a lot about South Boulder Rec Center. We know the public safety building needs a lot of work and replacement. So I'm looking forward to seeing what the polling says about our potential for raising revenues to tackle and solve these problems. So I would tend to go for polling more things rather than fewer. So I would certainly take the staff recommendation. I'd probably add in that 400 million, not because that's necessarily what we want to do, but to judge the appetite in the community for the different levels of debt authorization in the levies. In terms of the general fund bonding, I'm interested in that as a tool, but I am definitely hearing from you that if we were to do it short term, it would involve service reductions, which is not something I want to pursue right now. So I'm comfortable with the staff recommendation of continuing to put that investigate it and keep it in the long-term potential strategy, but don't necessarily need to move forward on that right this minute. Does that address all the items on the table for question number 1?
It does. I mean, I think section 97 is that's a necessary pull to make these other things happen.
Yep. So what I got for number 1, thanks.
All right, Tara.
I'm going to go with Alex. Just kidding. That was a reference to Jeopardy. 200. I feel like 400 is, personally, I'm not complaining. I'm not saying you're all tone deaf, but I'm saying to me it sounds tone deaf to both the businesses. Well, let's just leave it at that. I'll go with 200. I'm not going to even talk about it. Any other questions?
No, I'll just chime in for myself.
I mean, Nuria, did I answer?
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, I'm sorry. We've heard some of your colleagues talk about whether or not they wanted to add the general fund debt. And as I'm tallying so that we perhaps avoid a straw poll? It'd be good to know whether you have an opinion.
What's the vote right now?
No vote.
Oh, that's
Not
right.
a vote.
Oops. That was a
Nope.
joke. Glad that Tina's laughing at that one. I don't know. I don't, it's not my, I abstain.
Thank you.
Okay. Taisha.
I just wanted to chime in on the 200 piece and am feeling comfortable about that. And again, this is not a criticism to our forecaster experts, but not having that water information when we know that the cost of water is going to be significant, and not just at the water bill, but all of the things that are needed for water that we consume, that we use. And so I have concerns around the 400, and I feel more comfortable with the 200. Any other questions for me, Nuria?
Similar, Councilmember Adams, if you have an opinion on whether or not you would like us to pull on the general fund debt issue. Or if you have no opinions, that's good to note as well.
I would be open for that.
Can I just, Taisha, I'm sorry, did you finish? Because I want to go back and answer her question.
I did. Thank
Okay,
you
great.
for asking.
I'm going to go with the staff recommendation on that second question, now that I had a chance to think it through in 1 second.
That was the 200 million, Tara?
As well, the 200, and then that second question you asked?
I believe it was the staff recommendation to not pull on the
Correct,
general
the
fund debt
staff
at the moment.
recommendation to not pull that. That's what I said.
Okay. Not seeing any more hands. I would be open myself to pulling the 200. Well, let me just back up. Pulling the staff recommendations, but I also agree that it would be interesting to see what the community's appetite is for the 400 million. I understand that the general fund obligation is not creating enough revenue to pay for it, and that service is cut. Also, when we do this, I think there really needs to be some language into some of the things that we've spoken about before, specifically like what projects are we putting on hold? What projects are we cutting or downsizing? Because there are a lot of things in the works now. And what I hear is that these things just come up and they've got so much momentum and they're almost unstoppable. So maybe there's some things that are in the queue now that we can talk to the public about that we're not going to implement and we're not going to move forward. I think that would really be helpful in the polling language.
And Councilmember Kaplan, do you have an opinion on the recommendation to not pull the general fund bond or to move forward with that polling?
I don't think that we could pull the general obligation without pulling the 400 million, just for the revenue source. Mm-hmm. Am I understanding that correctly?
Well, slightly separate issues, right? In terms of one is the staff recommendation on the amount of the particular thing. The other is whether or not we move a separate measure on the general fund debt.
I mean, I always think more information is more valuable than less information, so I would support pulling that.
And if I may, I don't believe we heard from Councilmember Marquis, and I don't want to assume that we did not hear.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
No,
Tina.
On that particular issue, we heard on the other.
Okay.
You are muted.
How embarrassing. I am good with going either way. I think my concern would be if the polling firm were to come back and say that these different iterations of very similar questions were just too difficult to get solid information out of. I just want to hear that. Because I don't want to get to a point where I think if we do different groups, that's okay, but and I know the polling firm can do this, but I just want to make sure that people aren't given options where there's an obvious easiest path, which is, you know, less expensive, or and then we get polling information that doesn't show appetite for going a little further. I'm not sure if I'm being really clear, but understanding what the polling firm might think could be helpful in this case. So I'd keep an open mind on this one, which is probably not that helpful. So my apologies.
It works. And if I may, one more clarifying question to Councilmember Wallach. When you first started the conversation, I have a yes to different options for the Parks and Public Improvement Mill Levy. We currently have been talking about 200 and 400. Is that correct, or are
No, my preference was not to raise the mill levy, but to broaden the scope of uses to which those funds can be put.
Got it.
If we're also going to be polling for 200 and or the 400. And I think there's just a limit as to how many tax measures you can.
And do you have a preference on whether to poll for the 200 and 400?
Yes, I would poll for both in a split poll just to see if there's any appetite. All you can find out is that there is, which is a surprise, or there is not, in which case we put it behind us. I mean, there's no policy consequence to doing that polling. It's just knowledge.
And staff, correct me, keep me honest if you will, but I believe we have direction to poll on 2 options and direction to include the general fund debt.
That's what I heard as well. And I'll just highlight real quick, Tina, I think the point that you just made, we can get some feedback from the pollster on if they have some advice on that, because I think there is that potential. If we're polling on, can the city borrow money and increase taxes? Can the city borrow money and not increase taxes? If those are side by side, will that skew the results? And I think we can ask the pollster that question.
Great. Looks like Tara has one more question before we move on to our
I do.
second
Sorry.
question.
Here's my question. I want to make sure that my most important thing, Nuria, which is to make sure that we can use the Permanent Parks and Rec Fund for operations as well. That is my most important thing right now in this moment in history. Is that going to be pulled, or are we automatically doing that?
We have not written out language yet, but we believe that that is part of what will eventually come into the language.
Okay.
Okay. Second question. Does council wish to proceed on further analysis and polling a vacancy excise tax? Seeing some hands. Matt.
I'll start with yes. There's clearly community interest in this. But I think it's important to just knock right off. Right, I know in the presentation it was talking about commercial. Maybe just move that aside. That's not on the cards. So we're just talking residential vacancy tax. I will say that what I'm interested in, and I think some questions were brought up to it, is I'd like just to see what a tiered vacancy taxes based on square footage, because I want to make sure that we don't set a number that is disproportionately harsh on those that maybe own a smaller home versus someone who owns a gigantic home. So a tiered structure, but also raising the overall number. I think our number is only a couple thousand. I'd like to see the max go up to about 5K. So max up to 5K and a tiered structure, maybe 3 tiers based on square footage, to me seems like that's fair, reasonable, and does a combination of modify behavior while also generating revenue.
I'm going to jump down to Teresa real quick, because I think she has an answer to that question based on ad valorem.
So that's something we would need to look into the legality of. That hasn't been presented before. So thank you for raising it. And if it's something that council overall has an interest in, it would require some legal research.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, San Francisco does it similarly. Obviously, they're a different state, but there is some precedent for that. But yes,
They don't
if
have
there's any
Tabor.
oh God, they're so lucky, right? No, yeah,
Yes.
exactly.
Yes.
I appreciate it. Yeah, and does that fall within the realm of just regular staff research, or is that extra and above and beyond?
I would say,
had,
Teresa. Oh, go ahead.
I'm sorry. If we had a consensus by council tonight, that would be sufficient to move forward with research.
Okay.
Great. Nicole.
May I ask a clarifying question before I give my comment?
Of course.
My question is, if we were to move forward with the ballot measure for the tax, is that something the amount can then only be changed by another ballot measure? Because like when we think about fees, like the transportation maintenance fee, right, that can change as we go, potentially like with the public hearing and all that stuff. But this can only be ballot measure, right? Or so, yeah, another ballot measure.
Yes, that's accurate.
Okay, thank you. So my comment is I'm interested in further analysis, but I actually don't think we need to pull this one. And my reason for that is because I think seems like there's a general consensus that if this gets on the ballot, this will pass. I think it's something that most of us feel like our community is really going to vote for. And so in the past, when we have put things on the ballot without polling, and this is a pollster question. If we are already at our 3 or 4 ideal number, is this going to potentially interfere with the validity of that 3 or 4? Because I really don't think we need to pull this one. I think that if we pulled it, we would find that 2/3 plus people are good with this. Maybe wrong, but I think we all have that sense. So that's it. But what I would be interested in with the analysis is the flexibility of moving with square footage, the change in the future, like how that kind of fits with the fee versus tax. And so I guess sort of interested in some additional analysis, but really just based on comparing it with a fee as well, not necessarily analysis for ballot measure. I'm just curious if there are things we can do with a tax specifically that we can't do with a fee. Because it just seems more flexible with the fee.
Okay. See Aaron up next.
Yeah, so I am interested in this one. And I agree with Matt that the higher number would be good, like a 5K seems like a reasonable number to investigate. If we are able to do it tiered based on the size of the house or the value of the house, that I think would be intriguing. So I would agree that I would like to learn if that is an option. And and unless staff feels very strongly that including it would destroy the validity of the rest of the poll results, I would poll on it just to get, I think we can estimate what we think the support in the community is, but I would like to get statistically valid information about that as well. Thanks.
Mark.
My first comment is a question for Teresa. Are we better off doing this as an ordinance so that we have the flexibility of changing that ordinance if we want to raise the fees or lower the fees or change aspects of the enforcement of it, rather than being locked into an initiative where we'd have to do another initiative to affect a change?
Council member, I think what I would say to you is that there's a confidential memo addressing this issue, and it is accurate to say that there is more flexibility with fees.
Okay. On the assumption, I am not in favor of this, but on the assumption that a majority is, my suggestion would be that we do this in a fashion that gives us the greatest flexibility to adjust it in the future, rather than locking it into stone, We may find that there's a great appetite for higher fees. We may decide we want to have lower fees. And I think we ought to be, if that's the will of the council and the will of the community, to get this done, I think a more flexible approach would be beneficial to us. As for the merits of it, I've stated before that I'm not in favor of this. I look at the jurisdictions that have done it, and it's sort of the usual suspects: Minneapolis, Berkeley, San Francisco, Oakland, and New York. Not one of those jurisdictions I regard as particularly well governed, and we're just kind of chasing after it because that's the tax/fee du jour. And so I do not support it, but in recognition of the fact that many people do, and perhaps the community as a whole will, I think we should do it in a way that best serves our purposes, and not be hampered by an initiative.
Councilmember Wallach, I assume you mean not well governed now that I'm not there, right?
Oh, of course, of course.
Actually, a clarifying question for you.
They were fantastically governed until
it was.
You know,
was.
They were the models of all cities.
Quick question: do you have an opinion on whether to poll or not poll?
I would poll because the polling will tell us if that's the sentiment of the community to enact a form of vacancy tax. That doesn't compel us to do it as an initiative and prohibit us from doing it as an ordinance. And so if the community sentiment is there, I mean, if it gets 30% approval, okay, then that we know what to do with that. If it gets 80% approval, that doesn't mean we have to do it as an initiative. We can simply commit to doing it as an ordinance and serve the will of the community with greater flexibility. You know, at that point, the argument is over, and the question is, what's best in terms of creating a vacancy tax that the community can support and that will be beneficial.
Thank you.
Tara?
I agree with Mark, but I want to say that because I'm worried about, you guessed it, unintended consequences. And I was reading the Barha letter, which I hope you all read. It was concerning to me. Well, let me just say that I hope that staff read it. Did you read it, staff? Yes. And that they can be a partner with us in whatever we decide to do, whether it's an ordinance or a ballot measure, because I don't want, in these very fraught times, the wrong thing to happen from this initiative. I'm not saying I'm for it or against it. I'm neither for it nor against it. I'm fine with the will of council, but I like the flexibility part very much of what Mark said.
May I colloquy for just a second? My apologies to Teresa, our city attorney. I usually go to sleep reading those confidential memos. I cannot tell you how I missed this one. It will never happen again.
Glad to know that my hard work is your bedtime story.
And how do you go to sleep? They're so riveting, it should keep you up all night.
You're betting 1,000 tonight.
That's why I have bags under my eyes. I can't sleep.
Okay, I'm just going to jump in here real quick. We have another topic that Chris Mezchek is going to present to us. So I just want to keep us rolling with these questions and stay on time, but this is important. Tina.
Yeah, I support moving forward with the vacancy tax at a higher level, as indicated by Aaron, and I think Matt, and then which I think I said at the last meeting also. And if the pollster thinks we can poll it, because this is significantly different than the other measures, I think the other measures are going to be the issue, probably not this one, then great. But if we don't poll it, that's fine. I'm still would like to refer it to the community, and the community can ultimately decide. And Mark, I have to point out, the state of Utah has been doing an additional tax for property owners, second homeowners since 1986. So to not just the usual suspects. We can talk about it.
Well, Utah is, of course, my model for good governance. So thank you for pointing that out.
Anytime.
Okay, Ryan.
Yeah, I'm interested in the policy and moving it onto the ballot at probably a higher level. So I just sort of go to staff on this question of it. Is it are we going to distract and hurt our chances with the other initiatives if we put this one on? You could answer that now or not. I guess I'm kind of willing to just defer to you if you want to think about it or get feedback from the pollsters.
Yeah, I might. I'm seeing other people nod. I think getting some feedback from the pollsters might be helpful. We may be, depending on the rest of your feedback tonight, be pushing the number of items poll limit. So if there's some grace for some feedback, that'd be helpful.
You have my grace. Thank you.
And then I'll just tie it up with, I have the feeling that this would pass without polling. I do have concerns about it. I do believe that there are some people that are actively marketing properties that are unsuccessful and need a certain dollar amount to actually make it work. And it would be forcing rents down. I don't think it's going to make a dent in our housing. But at the same time, I don't want this to become Aspen either. I just noticed we still need to hear from Councilmember Adams as well.
But yes, odd polling.
Okay. Staff, do you have everything that you need?
We do.
Okay. Well, I think now we are going to move on to the charter amendments, and I will hand this over to Chris.
Thanks, Rob, and I'll look to Scott to pull the presentation back up. I'm going to make this section here pretty quick. We've got, that was section 1. We've got 2 more, but they're both pretty quick. So I'm going to briefly present the recommendations from the Charter Committee, and we'll go to the next slide. There are 2 charter changes that the Charter Committee has brought forward for Council to consider. The first is an amendment to section 130 of the Charter, which outlines the parameters of our boards and commissions. And Council placed an amendment to this section on the ballot in 2024 to implement some of the recommendations of the boards and commissions assessment. That amendment failed with a margin of 65 votes. The Charter Committee's brought this one forward to see if Council wants to reconsider this one this year with maybe some language tweaks regarding especially removal provisions for board and commission members. The second charter change that was brought forward from the committee is a change to Charter Section 176, which is related to open space purposes, and to consider adding wildfire mitigation as an explicit use for open space land. In staff's review, we don't believe that the charter language for open space purposes and open space land right now limits any of our wildfire resilience activities. But the Charter Committee considers that this might be a great way to really signal to the community the importance of wildfire mitigation. So with that, I'll make it quick and go to the next slide, which is the one question we have for Council for feedback from the Charter Committee.
All right. Looks like we have Mark up first.
I supported bringing the first matter before council because it's a council decision. I happen to think that it is bad timing to bring this back 1 year after it lost. You don't want to lose the next one. I have no particular confidence that the landscape has changed, other than the fact that we're going to take out the removal language, and I would like to be a little surer of our prospects before going forward with that. As far as the wildfire recommendation, yes, there's an element of symbolism to it, but if you look at the purposes for open space uses, there is nowhere that specifically authorizes us to use it for wildfire mitigation. And I would therefore argue the fact that we have not been burdened so far with anybody obstructing that use doesn't mean we will never have that problem in the future. And so I think a one sentence addition to the charter specifying that open space can be used for wildfire mitigation is an important sign to the community that we're taking this matter seriously. Doesn't cost us a dime, but I think it's an important thing to say.
Rob, can I colloquy, please, since I'm on the boards and commissions and I want to explain it before everybody comments and picks?
Please do.
Okay. So last year, the board and commission subcommittee wanted to reduce the amount of years that you had to be on a board or commission because that was in the charter that it was, I believe, 5 years. Am I wrong? Anybody who knows? Right? And then staff, no offense, added on something that I didn't think was going to be popular, and it was about being able to remove people, et cetera, et cetera. And I know for a fact, because I asked people why some people didn't want it and some organizations didn't, was that second part was why. Nobody's going to be against reducing the amount that you have to give your life to a board and commission, is my opinion. So I just wanted to explain that perspective before everybody decided. And while I'm on, I'm going to say yes and yes to both. So you don't have to call on me again. Thank you.
Great. Matt.
Thank you. I'm not entirely clear about what the changes are on that right now. So I'd like the removal, to be honest with you. So maybe I need to know a little more. But sure, I'm happy with it going on there. I just want to make sure we retain the ability to remove people for cause because we've had to do that. So that's an essential thing for us to maintain. With regards to the wildfire in section 176, I 100% support this. What's missing is the other natural disaster that we are afflicted with, which is flood. And I think it's critically important if we're going to say that open space can be used for wildfire mitigation, that it should also be clear that we should also be able to use open space for flood mitigation. It would be really odd for us to pick one disaster over another when they're both, and Boulder is at the top of the list in the state of Colorado for both wildfire and flood risk. Why wouldn't we just do both in one fell swoop? I know some people might have hangover or PTSD from our South Boulder Creek flood mitigation project, but at the end of the day, we've moved on from that. And at the end of the day, this is about creating maximum flexibility to protect ourselves from climate disasters with both flood and fire. So I'd like to expand it to flood, maybe pull the two. I don't know the difference or not at all, just see it, but it makes sense to do both.
May I colloquy with you, Matt?
And I'll colloquy after the colloquy.
My colloquy is short. Yes.
My colloquy is, would you be open to natural disaster or ecological disaster, or are you feeling strongly about articulating both flood and fire?
I feel strong. I mean, I don't know. I mean,
I'm just because
yeah,
I can feel like other
I
things could happen, and we would need it for that. I'm just yeah.
Maybe I mean, if it's going to be so broad as natural disaster, then say nothing, because I think in any natural disaster we have the legal authority to kind of do what we need to anywhere. I think specifically with flood and fire, only because those are the two that we have highest measured risks. So we have data to support those acute needs. So that would be my only reason to name those two.
Okay.
But if there's reason to do it another way, like you suggest, I could be open to that too.
No, I wanted to get some clarification on that, so I appreciate it. Yeah, that was it on that. That's the end of my colloquy. I have other comments, but not on your time. Thank you.
Okay, Nicole.
Thank you. On the first one, I think it was like us that added the extra words last time, but then the community wasn't super comfortable with. But I do that one. I'm not. I don't know. I still think it's a really good thing to do, but the volume of things that we're talking about for this year is concerning me a little bit. And I think that the taxing, debting, those measures, in my view, are far more important, because that's what's really going to get us the support we need to address these critical facilities issues and the things that community is really pressing us for, as our buildings fail. So I would be okay with not doing that one this year. I don't think it's as urgent of a need as these other things are. I do see it as a need, though. So, Tara, I'm really glad that, Board and Commissions keeps talking about this, because I think it is something worth doing. I think here again, if the pollsters are like, you guys, this is way too many to poll and get good data, this would be the first one for me to go. So
That's fine. I'm not offended. Don't worry.
Are open to it, I'm okay with it. I'm not against it. I think it is something we should have at some point. I just think there are more pressing things this year. And I think I was one of the people who was suggesting that this should go on this year. So just want to note that too. I am comfortable with the second one, with adding, with including this, with having it on. Matt, your point is valid about the floods as well. And Taisha, I really liked what you were saying too about just natural disaster in general. Largely because for me, the other threat that I think about with open space is desertification of those lands. And that is, I think, to your point, Taisha, ecological disaster as well. And so I'm going to leave that to staff and open space and the charter committee that brought this forward in the first place. Thank you.
All right. Tina.
Yeah, I can go similar to Nicole. I can go either way on the first one. I don't think it's particularly urgent, even though we've got preference for the change. And on the second, I would defer to open space about, we're just sort of doing this on the fly. So it's great to do flood and fire. I don't want to laundry list it. And I want to be specific to what the work is that they're doing. And of course, this can be changed over time as we face new challenges. So I don't know if I have a need to think of everything that could happen, as so much could.
Aaron.
Yes, I'm good with the first one. I do think that the problematic part of it was the removal provisions that we added. So I think with the removal provisions removed, I think it's worth moving forward for additional flexibility. On the second one, I would not include that. I'm hearing from staff and from open space that they have the flexibility to do the work that they need to for wildfire prevention without making this change. And I am concerned that adding this language, and even more so if we added flood, would cause the community to be concerned that we were going to impinge on open space in some certain ways. We certainly heard an earful from the community when they felt that open space was potentially under threat with the public realm tax combination. So I would recommend, and I would vote against, give direction to not move the second one forward to the ballot. Thanks.
Learning, Teresa.
Taisha.
Yes. So, it's always fun to get to bring up Colorado Parks and Wildlife twice in one meeting, but here I am. So to the second question around open space, I asked it because one of the core functions of open space includes mitigation of those things. So I too don't think that it's necessary to add. That's why I was trying to say more generally, because or if you felt strongly like you're hearing from community, they need to see these words. It helps them to want to fund. It helps them to want to contribute. Like those are the kinds of arguments that I'm here for. And that's why I was asking that kind of question. But from a technical question, I do agree with our mayor that, according to staff and to my experience working across the state on these issues, that mitigation was always considered. I also think we should add the boards and commissions. I think our community wants to see more accountability, wants to, really feel like they can rebuild trust with the decisions that are being made. Just because we're having more community engagement and I really applaud those efforts doesn't mean that we're building the trust in the decisions that are being made and how they're being made. So I also want to lift that up because this year is going to just be a very, people are going to be reading every single page. People are more engaged than we've ever seen them in the civic process. And so this is a great opportunity to be able to add that. And in addition, this is a year like we moved over our council elections to even year because we know more people vote. So this is the time to really get more community members and not having 20 or 30% or whatever our voting percentages on those odd years are. So those would be my recommendations and feedback in general. Thank you.
Great. Ryan.
Clarifying question. Is the question to us about whether to put these items on the ballot, or is it whether to poll test them?
This question for the charter committee items is for whether you want us to continue working on maybe drafting what a charter amendment could look like. If you have strong feelings on polling, we're happy to hear those. But the primary question is whether you want us to keep working on them.
Okay. Okay, then. So I think these are both tough. So I think for the first one, I like the work, but I think it's too crowded this year. So I'd say no on the first one with some trepidation, and then on the fire one. So can you clarify, staff? Would this have an operational effect? I mean, with the current leadership of the city, would it really change anything at all?
I'll maybe start and then see if others want to chime in. Dan, if you want to chime in if I get this wrong. But I think the short answer would be not an operational impact. We're doing our wildfire work on open space now. But Dan, correct me if I got that wrong.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yep.
Dan Burke, Director of Open Space and Mountain Parks. So the good news is catastrophic wildfire and our wildfire mitigation sort of has co-benefits. So catastrophic wildfire has, pretty negative effects on our efforts to preserve our natural areas, preserve our habitats, preserves agricultural lands, preserve agricultural waters and uses. It has negative effects on our ability to preserve and manage for recreational values. Those are all central core tenets of the charter purposes for open space, and preventing or mitigating risk for catastrophic wildfire is helping us preserve those values. So, yeah, I don't see an area where our work would change with additional clarification in the charter calling out wildfire. For instance, we already have fire hydrants on certain aspects of open space, which supports our prescribed fire program. We have a cistern on open space. Luckily, there's co-benefits of minimizing catastrophic wildfire while also preserving all these open space charter purposes that we're working on.
Okay, thank you. And then, sorry, just one more, but this is for Chris again. So the question to us is do we want you to continue to work on these? And so I guess I don't want to, do too much more research on the fly here, but I'm interested to continue to work on these insofar as perhaps staff responding to some of the new language and ideas that have come up today. If you have a viewpoint on adding flood versus adding something even more inclusive, but also I think Aaron makes a good point that maybe there are unintended consequences or this isn't necessary. So I'm actually not sure, and I'd be looking for a staff recommendation or something more from staff if that's possible. That'd be my version of working on this if you can.
And I appreciate that. And staff, correct me if I'm wrong. I mean, I think the work on it would be to draft language for you to see, with the possibility, depending on what we hear tonight, whether or not we include flood. So if that is not something you're interested in, we simply would not. The staff recommendation is not to do that. But if there is a desire to put this on the charter, that's the next step. And so we would happily draft something. I want to make sure that Teresa's clear on what that impact would be for her team, right?
So there's a legal analysis to do as well. And so I could see a confidential memo with respect to this.
Okay, thanks. Okay, then I would say please continue to work on it. I don't know how I feel about it, but I'd like to see the work. So thank you.
Okay, I think we hit everybody but myself. I support polling the boards and commission. I wasn't here for the last time that we did it, but it seems like a pretty straightforward question. I can see, like, if there are absences that go on and on, I mean, there needs to be some kind of repercussion for that. That said, if it does create polar fatigue, I'm happy to let that one go. As far as the wildfire, I noticed, even in the financial forecast, in their SWOT analysis, they had climate in both a weakness and a threat. And I'm going to apologize already because since I was moderating this, I wrote this down just so that I wouldn't forget it. But so I'm going to read. As we all know, Boulder sits at the edge of a wildland that does not negotiate. The Marshall Fire was a clear example of this. And while we've done meaningful work since, defensible space requirements, undergrounding, fuel management, there remains a gap in our foundational legal structure that we have the opportunity to address. Charter 176 governs how we use our open space. Right now, fire mitigation is not explicitly named as a permitted purpose. Staff tells us nothing is currently blocked, and I believe them. But the charter is not written for today. It's written for the moment of crisis we haven't faced yet, the legal challenges we haven't encountered yet, and the mitigation tools we haven't invented yet. The cost of including this in community polling is minimal. What we gain is something essential. What we learn whether Boulder residents see open space the way I believe they do, not just as a place to recreate and conserve, but as a living buffer that protects the homes and the neighbors behind it, the neighborhoods behind it. This amendment does something simple and powerful. It makes explicit that protecting our built environment from wildfire is not an incidental to what open space is for. It's part of what open space is for. Before we decide whether this belongs on the November ballot, I think we should ask the community. So this is very forward-looking for me. And I know that there's some legal ramifications, I understand, but I would vote for that inclusion.
Wonderful. Well, as I see your direction, we do not have enough interest to move forward the boards and commissions change for this year, although there seems to be some interest for some future year. We do have direction to do continued work on wildfire and inclusion of that. We did not hear from enough folks to move forward polling on this matter. So I will defer to Teresa to work on the research and we will get back to you. And we have one last item.
One final section. Back to Scott.
Thank you, Scott. So we'll just jump in here. This is intended to provide an overview of community-sponsored city petitions, as well as state and region potential ballot measures. So we do have currently one community-sponsored city petition. This is included in your council packet. It is for commercial and residential vacancy tax. And on the state and region potential 2026 ballot measures, right now, Boulder County, Boulder Valley School District, those are to be determined because of timing. We did not have official items for their ballot measures. And you'll see here and included in your packet, and to include links, each of the state of Colorado potential ballot measures with potential tax impact. I won't go into detail unless you have questions. We do have, I think, Heather here online too to help support some questions if you have on the state of Colorado ballot measures.
And a note as well, I know that the evening is late, but we will be planning a legislative update in June if there is additional information.
All right, if there are no questions there, this concludes our presentation for the evening. And
I see Aaron has his hand up, Krista, I'm sorry.
Oh, sorry, thank you.
Go ahead,
I just wanted to say, yeah, sorry, Rob, thanks for calling on me. Yeah, I didn't want to ask questions or talk any of that over now, but I did want to flag that I am very concerned about some of those ballot measures, and I would like for us to discuss taking a position on them at a council meeting in the future. But that'll be subject to a future CEC request, and hopefully CEC will be willing to schedule that. So I'd like to see us take positions on several of those.
Okay. Well, with no other items on tonight's agenda, I will close this meeting at 9:23. Thank you, everybody. Appreciate all the work everybody's done.
Thanks,
Thank you
Rob.
so much. Thanks for getting us done in time.